I started the hike early in the morning because I wanted as many hours of daylight as possible. The air felt cold when I stepped out of my car, and the inside of my chest tightened the moment the wind slid under my shirt. The parking lot was empty except for one old truck far in the corner, but there was no sign of anyone around it. I strapped my backpack on, checked my water, tightened my boots, and walked toward the trailhead. I had picked this place because it was quiet and far from the usual crowded spots. A place where I could think, breathe, and move without hearing anyone else. I did not really have a plan, only a rough idea of climbing until I reached the ridge and returning before dark. I had done many hikes before, but something about this one already felt heavier, like the silence around the trees was pressed into the air itself. As soon as I entered the trail, the forest seemed to swallow the light. The trees were tall and close together, and their branches formed a dark ceiling above me. The sun was strong outside, but inside the trail it felt like early evening. The path was narrow and covered with layers of dry leaves that cracked under my boots. Every few minutes, something shifted in the bushes, and I kept telling myself it was only squirrels or birds. I tried to focus on my steps and not on whatever noises came from the sides. About an hour into the hike, I noticed the trail looked different from the map I had studied at home. The slope became steeper much earlier than expected, and the ground turned soft, almost muddy. My boots sank a little with each step. The air felt warmer and thicker, and the deeper I went, the more the forest changed. The trees grew taller, the trunks darker, and their roots twisted out of the ground like old ropes. The sound of the wind barely made it through the branches. It felt like the forest was getting denser around me, closing in without actually moving. I kept hiking because I did not want to turn around so soon. After another long stretch, I saw something strange on the ground, fresh footprints. Not boot prints like mine, bare footprints. They were deep, like whoever made them had been running or carrying something heavy. The size looked like an adult, but the edges were messy because the mud had spread. I felt a strange pressure in my chest as I crouched to look at them. They were pointed in the same direction I was heading. I tried to ignore the uneasiness building inside me, but it grew heavier with every minute. The higher I climbed, the more the forest seemed to watch me. I kept hearing faint snapping sounds far behind me, the kind you hear when someone steps on a branch. Every time I stopped walking, the forest would go dead silent, too silent. Even the air felt still, like the whole place was holding its breath. I tried to keep moving at a steady pace, but something inside me knew I was not alone anymore. I could not see anyone, but I could feel the weight of something following me from a distance. At a tight turn in the trail, I saw the first sign that made my stomach twist. On the side of the path, someone had scratched long marks into the bark of a tree. They were fresh, the wood still pale and wet-looking where it had been cut. The pattern looked like someone had dragged something sharp across it again and again, deep enough to leave long scars. I ran my fingers over the cuts, and they were warm from the sun, meaning they had been made not long before I passed by. I kept moving, now with a growing unease that I tried to push down. I kept telling myself it was probably nothing, but the truth was that the forest felt wrong, like it held something I should not have disturbed. The footprints appeared again farther up, only this time they looked different. They were deeper and angled, as if whoever was making them kept turning around. Some were pointed toward the ridge, while others faced back down the trail. It almost looked like someone kept circling or pacing in the same spot. The ground was a mix of mud and dry leaves, and the prints were smudged from movement. I stood there longer than I should have, trying to understand what might have made someone walk barefoot on a trail full of rocks, sticks, and sharp roots. After a while, I heard something far behind me, a low, heavy sound, almost like something hitting the ground or someone stumbling. I froze. The sound came again, this time closer. I could not see anything when I looked back down the trail, but I felt that same tight pressure in the air. I decided to move faster now, pushing myself up the slope with long steps. My pack felt heavier, my breathing louder. The sound behind me faded for a moment, and I hoped it was only an animal, but the fear stayed in my stomach. When I reached a narrow section of the trail where the ground dropped off on one side, I noticed something else. My own footprints from earlier had been stepped over. Something or someone had followed the same path I walked without me noticing. The prints were wide and heavy, pressing deep into the soft dirt. The edges looked messy, and in some places the dirt had been dragged like a foot had slid or stumbled. That was when I knew something was definitely wrong. I forced myself to keep climbing even though every part of my body told me to turn back. At the top of the slope, the trail opened into a small clearing. The trees thinned out just enough for light to reach the ground. I stepped into the clearing and saw something lying near the center. It was a piece of torn fabric. Dark blue, thick, the kind used for jackets. The edges were ripped unevenly. I bent down and picked it up. Felt dirty and damp. There was no sign of anyone around. No path leading away from the clearing except the one I had come from and another one that was barely visible, swallowed by thick bushes. I felt torn about which way to go, but something in my body told me not to take the second path. It looked like it had not been used for a long time, and the bushes seemed to hide more than they revealed. I turned back toward the way I came, planning to head down quickly before the sun dropped lower. That was when I heard it again, the same heavy sound from earlier, now closer, coming from the trees behind the clearing. The branches twitched, and the sound of something brushing against them reached me. My body reacted before I thought. I grabbed my pack straps, lowered my center of gravity, and moved down the trail fast but controlled. The forest felt completely different on the way down. Every shadow felt alive. Every gust of wind felt like breath on the back of my neck. The trail behind me seemed louder than the one ahead. I kept hearing soft thumps, like footsteps landing on uneven ground. Every time I tried to convince myself it was only my imagination, the sound would come again, steady and real. My legs burned from moving so fast, but I did not slow down. I knew something was behind me. I could not see it, but the forest made it impossible to ignore. When I reached the lower section of the trail, I saw something that confirmed my fear. The footprints I had seen earlier were now on both sides of the trail, going up and coming down. Someone had been moving back and forth while I was higher on the ridge. Some prints were fresh, edges sharp, soil damp. I felt my heartbeat pounding in my ears as I pushed forward. The parking lot felt impossibly far away, as if the trail grew longer behind me. The sound behind me grew louder once I neared the last bend. I forced myself not to look back because I knew if I did, I would freeze. My boots hit the ground harder now, my breath fast and uneven. I broke into a run the moment I saw the first glimpse of the open parking area through the trees. The sunlight looked brighter there, warm and safe. I sprinted across the last stretch of the trail, burst out of the woods, and ran straight to my car. My hands shook uncontrollably as I unlocked the door and threw myself inside. I slammed the door shut and locked it. My chest rose and fell in fast waves as I stared at the entrance of the trail, waiting to see movement. Nothing came out. The trees stayed still. The parking lot was silent. But something inside me knew that whatever had followed me was still there, watching from the shadows. I started the engine and pulled out of the lot as fast as I could, my eyes flicking to the rearview mirror again and again. Even when I reached the main road, the fear stayed in my stomach, deep and cold. I did not stop driving until I was far from the forest. When I finally got home, I sat in my car for a long time before going inside. My clothes were damp with sweat, my legs still shaking. I replayed every moment of the hike in my head, trying to make sense of what had happened. There were no ghosts, no impossible creatures, nothing supernatural. Everything I saw and heard was something a real person could do. That was what made it worse. I was lucky, and I never went back to that mountain again. I decided to take a long hike on a random weekend when everything in my life felt too loud. Work had been a mess. My phone kept buzzing with things I didn't want to deal with, and my head felt full, like I had been carrying too many thoughts for too long. I picked a trail far from the city, a place I found by scrolling around online maps until I noticed a thin line running through a huge patch of green. It didn't have a big name. It didn't look like the kind of place many people talked about. That almost made it better. I wanted quiet. I wanted space. I wanted a long path where I could walk without seeing anyone and clear my head in the way only long and lonely trails can do. The first hour felt almost perfect. I could feel the cool morning air sitting on my skin, the kind that makes everything feel fresh, like starting over. The trail moved through tall trees that allowed thin lines of sunlight to fall between their branches. The ground was soft from old leaves that had broken down into a kind of dark, quiet soil that made every step sound gentler. I remember noticing the small details. Small birds hopping between branches, the distant sound of water running somewhere I couldn't see, and that steady feeling of being far away from anything human. But as I walked deeper, things started to feel less peaceful. It wasn't one big thing. It was a slow change, like a shift in the air. The trees grew closer together, almost tighter, like they were trying to hold something in. The ground changed too. It went from soft and wide to uneven and full of rocks that forced my steps to slow. The silence also changed. Before, it felt calming. Now it felt heavier. Even the birds seemed quieter. I kept walking anyway, because turning back felt like giving up too soon. After another hour, I noticed something that bothered me more than I expected. The trail markers were getting older. The paint looked faded, and some trees that should have had markers on them were bare, like they had peeled or fallen off. I had downloaded the offline map, but the line on the screen didn't show the tiny turns of the real trail. I had to trust what I saw in front of me, and that didn't feel as certain anymore. Still, I told myself that many trails were like this, old, not maintained, forgotten by most people. After a while, I reached a small clearing. The sunlight hit it more directly than anywhere I had walked so far. At first it felt like a good sign, like an open space meant I was moving in the right direction. But then I noticed the ground. Something about it felt wrong. The grass was pressed down in long, uneven lines, like something heavy had dragged across it. The marks weren't clean, not like made by a vehicle, but wide and messy, almost like weight being pulled by hand or by something walking with uneven legs. I couldn't tell what could make a shape like that. I tried to ignore it, but I kept staring at how fresh it looked, like it hadn't been there long enough to fade. I kept walking, but I found myself turning around more often than usual. The feeling of being watched slowly worked its way into me. I kept telling myself it was just the quiet, just the isolation, just my own thoughts turning into shadows. But I knew it was more than that. My steps grew slower, not because I wanted to enjoy anything, but because I wanted to listen. Every few minutes I heard something faint behind me. Not loud, not big, just small movements in the bushes or the soft sound of something stepping on leaves. Every time I stopped, it stopped too. That was what made me feel it wasn't just my mind. About halfway up a narrow ridge, I found something else that made the whole day feel wrong. A water bottle, crushed flat, lying beside the trail. It didn't look old. The label wasn't faded. The plastic still held its shape except for the part crushed by force. I picked it up and noticed the cap was still on tight. It looked like it didn't fall by accident. It looked like something had stepped on it, hard. I kept it in my bag without thinking too much, though my stomach felt tight in a way that made everything close in around me. The trail ahead became harder and harder to follow. There were long sections where it almost disappeared under thick layers of old leaves. I kept moving forward because turning back now felt even scarier. Whatever I had heard behind me earlier still felt close, like some quiet thing keeping an even pace. Eventually, the trail dropped into a long, narrow stretch between steep slopes on both sides. The air there felt colder, like sunlight couldn't reach it even though the sky above was clear. The walls of dirt and rock on both sides made it impossible to see anything around me. The sounds behind me grew louder in that space, and I realized how exposed I was. I kept my footsteps as quiet as possible, trying to listen more than I moved. I could hear breathing behind me at one point, slow, steady, not mine. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see what was making it. I only walked faster, pushing my legs through the tight space until I reached the other end and burst back into the open woods. I stayed on the trail for another hour, forcing myself to focus on the path instead of the fear growing inside my chest. But then I saw something ahead of me that made my heart drop. A camping chair, folded, leaning against a tree. It looked like someone had placed it there just for a moment. No dirt on it, no water stains, no signs of age. It looked like it belonged to someone who had stepped away only minutes before I arrived. But the forest around it was silent. Too silent. I didn't touch it. I didn't want to know more about it. The trail turned again and began climbing up the side of a long hill. Halfway up, I finally looked back. I wish I hadn't. I didn't see a person, but I saw where something had moved through the trees. Branches bent, leaves scattered, a clear line in the brush where something had pushed through, following the same trail I had taken. It wasn't an animal trail. It was too direct, too heavy, too intentional. My legs started shaking from fear and exhaustion as I kept climbing. I didn't stop to drink water. I didn't stop to rest. I just forced myself upward because every part of me felt like I was running out of time. At the top of the hill, the path widened a little and sunlight broke through again. I felt a bit of hope, not safety, but the possibility of it. Then, for the first time all day, I heard a sound that didn't try to hide. A sharp, heavy crack of a branch snapping behind me. Not close, but not far either. Something was no longer being careful. I didn't think. I just ran. I ran down the other side of the hill, letting gravity pull me faster than I should have allowed. The trail turned rough and rocky, but I didn't slow down. I tripped several times and scraped my hands on the ground, but I kept running because the forest behind me felt alive with movement. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see what was chasing me. The trail finally reached a wider dirt road meant for service vehicles. I don't know how long I ran down it before I reached the small gravel parking area where my car waited. My clothes were dirty, my legs scraped, my lungs burning. I jumped inside, locked the doors, and sat still for a long moment, shaking so hard I could barely put the key into the ignition. When I finally drove away, I checked the mirror once. I didn't see anything, just trees and shadows. But I never forgot what I felt watching me out there. Something human, something patient, something that knew the woods better than I ever could. I didn't report anything to anyone because I didn't see a face and I didn't have proof. All I had were sounds, crushed grass, broken branches, and the feeling of being followed for hours through a patch of forest that looked empty but clearly wasn't. The ending is simple and clear. I never went back to any random trail again. Now I only hike in places full of people, places with clear maps, bright signs, and noise all around. I learned that sometimes the scariest things in the woods are not wild animals or strange creatures. Sometimes it's something real, something that walks on 2 feet, something that stays hidden until you are far from help, something that follows quietly for reasons you will never know. And the fear of what I never saw has stayed with me every day since. The sun was low in the sky when I started my hike that day, the orange light casting long shadows through the tall trees. I had chosen a trail deep in the mountains, one not many people used anymore. It was supposed to be a quiet hike, a place to get away from everything. The city noise, the endless emails, the buzz of everyday life. I packed light, a small backpack with water, some snacks, a map, my phone, and a flashlight. The weather was clear and cool, perfect for hiking. The trail was narrow and winding, covered in a layer of fallen leaves that crunched under my boots. The trees around me were tall pines and oaks, their branches thick with green needles and leaves that whispered when the wind blew. I felt calm walking through the forest, surrounded by the smells of pine and earth. Birds chirped overhead, and small animals rustled in the underbrush. I hadn't seen a single person all day, which was exactly what I wanted. After about 2 hours, the trail started to climb steeply. My legs grew tired, but the view kept me going. I could see the valley far below, a patchwork of fields and rivers stretching out toward the horizon. I stopped for a moment to catch my breath and take a sip of water. I looked at the map to check my progress. According to the map, there was a small clearing not far ahead where I planned to rest and eat before heading back. I kept moving, the trail growing rougher and less clear. The leaves were thicker here, and branches hung low. The sunlight dimmed as the trees crowded closer together. I started to notice something strange. The trail was less marked. The usual painted blazes on trees were missing or faint. I kept telling myself that the trail would reappear soon, that I was just being too cautious. But a knot formed in my stomach. I stopped and looked around carefully. The forest felt different here, quieter, heavier. The sounds of birds and animals were almost gone. The air smelled damp and old, like moss and wet wood. My heartbeat sped up. I reached for my phone to check my location, but the signal was gone. No bars. I was deep in the forest, but according to the map, the clearing should have been close. I pushed forward slowly, trying to find any sign of the trail. After walking for what felt like an hour, but could have been only minutes, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There were footprints in the mud. Not animal prints, but human ones. They were fresh and led off the faint trail into the thicker trees. I looked at them for a long moment. They didn't look like mine, bigger, heavier steps. I felt a sharp unease, but I told myself not to panic. Maybe someone else was nearby. Maybe a lost hiker. I thought about calling out, but the forest swallowed any sound. No response came back. I debated turning back, but I had been hiking for hours already, and I didn't want to get lost. I decided to follow the footprints cautiously, thinking maybe they would lead me to the clearing or another trail. The footprints led deeper into the woods, past broken branches and thick bushes. The light from the sun was fading fast now, and the shadows grew longer. Then I heard it, a faint noise. Not an animal, not the wind, but a soft, shuffling sound, like something dragging or moving slowly through the underbrush. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The sound came again, just behind me. I turned quickly, but saw nothing. The forest looked empty, dark, and quiet again. I started walking faster, my eyes scanning every movement, every shape. I felt like something was watching me, following me. I tried to stay calm, but my breathing was heavy, and my legs felt weak. I pulled out my flashlight, turning it on and shining it in front of me. The beam caught nothing but trees and leaves. I called out once more, but only silence answered. The footprints suddenly stopped at the edge of a small stream. The water was cold and clear, flowing slowly over smooth stones. I bent down and touched the water, trying to clear my mind. I knew I had to make a decision, keep going in the dark or try to backtrack and find the main trail. I looked back the way I came. The trail was gone, swallowed by thick brush and darkness. The forest was dense, making it almost impossible to find my way. My phone's battery was low, and the cold was starting to seep into my bones. I decided to follow the stream downstream, hoping it would lead to a road or campsite. Moving along the water's edge, I felt a little safer. The sound of flowing water was steady and real. But as I walked, the forest grew even darker, the trees thicker, and the path less clear. Suddenly, I saw a flash of movement ahead. Something large and dark darted between the trees. I froze, heart racing again. It was too fast to see clearly, but it looked like an animal, maybe a deer or a bear. I stayed very still, hoping it wouldn't come closer. The sound of heavy breathing filled the air, but it wasn't mine. I started walking faster, careful not to make noise, but the crunch of leaves under my boots felt loud in the quiet forest. The flashlight flickered and then died. I was plunged into darkness. Panic hit me full force. I pulled out my phone and used the last bit of battery to light my way. I followed the stream for what felt like hours, stumbling over rocks and roots. My legs ached, and my clothes were wet from crossing small pools of water. Just as I was about to give up, I heard something, distant voices and the faint glow of lights. I moved toward the sound and soon found a narrow dirt road cutting through the forest. A group of hikers had built a small campfire nearby. Relief washed over me like a wave. I was safe. They helped me call for help, and soon a ranger arrived. I told them about the footprints, the strange noises, and how I had lost the trail. The ranger explained that the area was known for being tricky to navigate, especially off-marked trails. Sometimes hikers got lost and wildlife like bears wandered close by. The experience shook me deeply. I realized how quickly a peaceful hike can turn into something dangerous when you lose your way. I promised myself I would never take the forest's quiet for granted again. The forest is beautiful but unforgiving if you're not prepared. That day taught me that nature doesn't need ghosts or monsters to be scary. Sometimes, just being lost, alone, and unsure of what's around the next bend is enough to make your skin crawl. The forest was real and raw, and it reminded me how small and vulnerable I really was. But I made it out, and that's what matters. I took a random trail that morning, something I normally never do on long solo hikes. I usually plan everything, but that day I felt restless and wanted something different. The sky was clear, the air was cool, and the woods looked quiet in a way that made me feel safe. I told myself it would be just another long hike, nothing more, nothing less. I had no idea how wrong I was. The trail started easy, almost too easy. Wide dirt path, soft leaves under my boots, a light breeze moving through the trees. I remember feeling good, like the kind of calm you only feel when you're far away from people and noise. The deeper I went, the quieter the forest became. Even the birds seemed far away. Everything around me felt still, but not in a scary way yet, just empty. After about an hour, the ground changed. The dirt path thinned out, and the earth felt harder, almost packed down in strange flat patches. I saw no markers on the trees and no footprints except my own. The trail didn't look official anymore, but it stretched forward like people had used it before. I kept going because I felt too deep in to turn back so soon. I told myself it was just a random side trail that wasn't on the map. After another 20 minutes, I noticed something odd. Small broken sticks laid across the trail in straight lines, 3 at a time, then another set and another. They almost looked placed. I stepped over them, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe someone did it for fun. Maybe it was just the wind, even though they looked too tidy for that. I felt a small tension in my stomach, but I pushed on. The trees grew taller, and the light dimmed even though it was still early morning. The forest floor looked untouched. No trash, no boot marks, nothing to show that other hikers came here. I had a growing feeling that I had wandered into an area people didn't use anymore. The air felt heavier, like the whole place had been left alone for too long. A little later, I came across the first thing that made my skin crawl. On the right side of the trail, I saw a small pile of rocks, stacked carefully, all in the same size range, like someone arranged them on purpose. There were more further ahead. Every pile was the same height, same shape. The spacing between them was too even to be natural. They followed the trail like markers. My heartbeat picked up. I didn't touch them. The forest around me started feeling different. Not louder, not dangerous, just watching. I kept hearing nothing, and sometimes that's worse than hearing something. My footsteps sounded too loud. Every time I stopped walking, the silence felt like it pushed against my ears. Then I reached a muddy patch in the trail, and that's when everything changed. In the mud, I saw a footprint, a human footprint. Fresh, deep, not mine, I checked. It was longer than mine and wider. Only one print, though, like someone stepped there and then the ground turned solid again. I looked around and saw no one. No movement, no sound. I felt my chest tighten. Someone had been here recently, and I wasn't supposed to be here at all. I should have turned back right then, but I felt trapped between going deeper and retracing my steps past all those rock piles and stick lines again. Something about turning around made me feel even more exposed, like whatever left that footprint might be behind me instead of ahead of me. My nerves were buzzing, but I kept walking forward. The trail narrowed until it was no wider than my shoulders. Branches scraped my clothes. The air smelled different, like wet soil mixed with something metallic and sharp. The trees leaned closer together, their branches locking above me like a tunnel. I felt like I had stepped into a place the forest didn't want people to enter. Then I reached the clearing. It wasn't big, just a flat open space in the middle of thick woods. In the center of it sat an old campsite, at least I thought it was a campsite. A torn backpack lay against a stump. A metal cup rusted into the dirt. A jacket, sun-faded and stiff, half buried under leaves. No tent, no fire pit, no sign that someone packed up and left. It looked like someone had walked away from it and never came back. The air around the clearing felt wrong. The silence was too heavy, like the place held a memory of something bad. I felt my body tighten with instinct, and every part of me told me not to step closer. I scanned the ground and saw tracks, deep ones, circling the clearing like someone paced around and around for a long time. Each footprint pointed inward toward the abandoned gear. That was when I realized something that made my stomach drop. There were no footprints leaving the clearing, only footprints circling it. And the fresh footprint I saw earlier matched the size of the ones here. I backed away slowly, my breathing turning shallow. My skin felt cold even though I was sweating. I didn't want to turn my back on the clearing, but I forced myself to because staying felt worse. I moved as quietly as I could, retracing the trail faster than I thought my legs could carry me. As I walked back, I kept hearing small sounds, twigs snapping, leaves shifting. But every time I stopped, the forest froze again. I didn't see anyone, but I felt watched the whole time. The rock piles felt closer than before, the stick lines sharper and more deliberate. My nerves were stretched tight, and I didn't look behind me once, scared of what I might see. It took me much longer to get back to the real trail than it should have. When I finally stepped onto the main path again, the forest felt different, normal, open, alive. Birds were singing again. The air was lighter. It felt like I had crossed out of something hidden back into the world I understood. When I made it back to my car, my hands shook so badly I dropped my keys twice. I sat inside with the doors locked for a long time before I could start the engine. I've hiked many trails in my life, and I'm not the kind of person who scares easily. But whatever I walked into that day wasn't a place made for random hikers. Someone had been there, recently. Someone who walked in circles around their own abandoned gear. Someone who left deliberate signs on the trail. Someone whose single footprint in the mud looked fresh, like they were still close. I never reported it because I didn't even know what I would say. I just know that I will never take a random trail again. And when I think back on the clearing, the abandoned gear, and the footprints that never left, I understand something clearly now. Some places in the woods aren't forgotten. They're avoided, and now I know why. I decided to take a solo hiking trip into a forest I hadn't explored before. It was late summer, the kind of time when the trees are thick with leaves, the air smells like earth and pine, and the sun filters softly through the canopy. I wanted to get away from everything for a while. No phone, no people, just me and the wilderness. The trailhead was easy to find, and for the first few hours, everything was exactly what I hoped for. Birds called in the distance, the wind rustled through the trees, and the path was soft underfoot from fallen needles. The forest felt alive but peaceful. I moved slowly, soaking it all in, stopping to look at mushrooms growing near the roots of old trees, noticing how the sunlight made patterns on the moss-covered rocks. I had a backpack with the essentials: water, snacks, a map, a compass, a first aid kit, and a flashlight, though I didn't expect to need it until the end of the day. My plan was to hike deep enough to find a good spot to camp, rest, and head back early the next morning. The trail started to climb as I moved further in. The air grew cooler, and the trees grew taller and thicker. The sounds of civilization faded completely. No planes overhead, no distant cars. Only the crunch of my boots on twigs and leaves. I felt good, even though I was sweating. The climb was steady, but the forest gave me enough shade to keep from overheating. At some point, the trail split. I stopped to check my map. The path to the left seemed to loop around a small ridge and lead to a clearing near a creek. The path to the right went higher up, toward a rocky outcrop that promised a view. I chose the right, thinking the view would be worth it. The path was narrower here, and roots and rocks made footing tricky. I had to watch my steps closely. After a while, the trail got less clear. I stopped seeing the usual trail markers, small strips of tape or painted blazes on trees. The forest floor was thicker here with fallen branches and bushes. I realized I had probably wandered off the main path. I tried to retrace my steps, but everything looked the same. The trees around me all seemed tall and old, casting deep shadows. I stopped moving for a moment to listen. There was a strange silence. No birds, no insects, nothing except the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. That quietness unsettled me. I took a deep breath and pulled out my compass, trying to get my bearings. I thought maybe I could head east to find the creek I saw on the map. As I started walking, I noticed something odd. The forest floor here wasn't just covered in leaves. It was scattered with small piles of rocks, not like cairns or trail markers, but just piles of stones, uneven and rough, like someone had thrown them there hurriedly. I kept moving cautiously, feeling more alert now. The piles kept appearing every few meters. Some were small, others quite tall. The more I walked, the more the piles seemed to crowd the ground. It felt like someone had been here recently, but I saw no footprints, no broken branches, no other signs of people. Suddenly, I heard a loud crack behind me. I whipped around, heart pounding. Nothing, just the trees. The silence came back, heavier than before. I told myself it was probably a falling branch, maybe a squirrel jumping between limbs, but the feeling didn't leave me. I quickened my pace, trying to find the creek or any sign of the main trail. Then I noticed the piles of rocks changed. Some were not just rough piles. They looked arranged, as if someone had carefully stacked them. Some even had sticks or leaves balanced on top like markers. I started feeling something else, that I wasn't alone in this part of the forest. I stopped. I tried calling out, but no sound came from my mouth. The air felt thick and heavy, like the forest was holding its breath. I checked my watch. I had been walking for nearly 3 hours since the trail split. If I didn't find the creek soon, I'd have no good place to camp. The sun was dropping lower, throwing long shadows. I realized I'd been walking in circles. The piles of rocks looked the same as ones I'd passed earlier. Panic rose, but I forced myself to stay calm. I knew panic would only make things worse. I decided to climb a tree to get a better view. There was a sturdy pine nearby, about 15 feet tall. It took some effort, but I pulled myself up onto a thick branch. From there, I scanned the forest around me. I couldn't see any creek or clearing, only endless trees and shadows. The sky was now tinged with orange and purple. I climbed down carefully, trying to keep steady. As I landed, I heard a rustling to my left, near one of the rock piles. My heart jumped again. This time, I caught a glimpse of something moving quickly between the trees. Too fast to be a deer. It was low, maybe crouching. I stared, but it disappeared into the shadows. My skin crawled. I had to get out of there. I remembered the compass and decided to head west. That direction should lead me back to the main trail. I tried to follow a straight line, but the forest was thick, and I had to push through bushes and duck under branches. My arms and legs got scratched, but I didn't care. I was desperate to get out. About an hour later, as the light faded almost completely, I finally heard running water. Relief washed over me. I found the creek from the map, its cold water sparkling even in the dim light. Following it downstream, I hoped to find the trailhead or a campsite. Then, just as I was about to lose hope, I spotted the worn wooden bridge I had crossed in the morning. The main trail was near. I felt tears of relief burn my eyes. My legs were sore, my clothes torn, but I was safe. The forest had been quiet all day, but that strange part, with the rock piles and sudden movements, stayed with me. It was real. There had been something or someone watching, waiting. Maybe it was a trap, or maybe someone trying to scare off hikers. Whatever it wasn't a story or a ghost. It was a warning. I made it back to my car just as night fell. I checked in with a ranger to tell them about the strange part of the trail and the piles of rocks. They said other hikers had reported similar things in that area. Strange markers, signs of people hiding or leaving warnings. From then on, I stick to the marked trails and always let someone know exactly where I'm going. The forest is beautiful, but it's also real and wild. Sometimes the scariest thing isn't what you see. It's what you don't see but know is there, watching quietly just beyond the trees. I started the hike early in the morning because I wanted to finish most of it before the sun got too strong. The area was far from towns, deep inside a stretch of hills that people usually avoided because the trails were old and not looked after anymore. I wanted something quiet, something that felt untouched, something that forced me to be alone with the land around me. I had planned the route for weeks, looking at old maps, checking elevation lines, studying distances. I packed everything the night before, making sure I had more than enough water, extra food, and the emergency things that hikers keep just in case. The idea was simple: walk until the end of the ridge, camp for the night, and come back the next day. Nothing complicated. I had done things like this many times. I felt confident, calm, and honestly excited. The trail started easy. The morning air felt cool and clean, and the sound of distant insects made the whole place feel alive. The ground was soft with old leaves, and every step made a quiet crunch that repeated behind me as if the forest was echoing it back. I kept a steady pace, breathing slowly, keeping my eyes on the markers nailed to old trees. Everything felt normal, and I moved deeper into the hills without thinking too much about anything. Around midday, the trail started to change. The trees grew closer together, the light became dim and uneven, and the air felt heavier. I noticed small things first, like how the trail looked less used than I expected. The ground was uneven and broken in places, as if rain had washed parts of it away months ago and nobody ever fixed it. Branches stuck out at strange angles, forcing me to duck or push them aside. The silence became thicker, the kind that made my ears strain for any sound at all. I checked the map again, but everything still matched. I kept going. After another hour, I reached a steep slope that I hadn't expected to be this long. The climb felt endless, and the ground was loose under my boots. Every step slid half a step back. My shirt stuck to my skin with sweat, and my arms felt heavy even without holding anything. The whole place smelled like damp soil and old plants. I stopped to catch my breath and looked around. That was the first moment I felt something I didn't like. It was nothing big, nothing you could point at. Just a sense that I was deeper into this place than I should be, like the forest behind me had closed in a little without making a sound. I kept climbing until I reached the ridge. The view should have been wide, but the trees blocked most of it. Only small gaps showed rolling hills fading into the distance. I walked along the ridge, expecting a clear area where I could stop for lunch. Instead, the trail narrowed into something that barely looked like a trail at all. I felt uneasy, but I pushed forward because turning back felt like giving up for no reason. As I walked, I started seeing strange signs on the ground. At first, it was just odd footprints, not animal tracks I recognized, but shapes that looked like someone had walked there many times, always in the same direction, always in the same tight line. The dirt was pressed down in a way that didn't look natural. The more I followed the path, the more I saw signs of someone else passing through recently. Broken twigs, scraped bark, and small flattened areas where someone might have stopped and stood still for a while. None of it was dangerous on its own, but it made my chest feel tight. I wasn't expecting anyone up here. Most people didn't even know this trail existed anymore. The deeper I went, the more I felt watched. Not in a dramatic way, not like in movies, but in a slow, steady, uncomfortable way, like something kept matching my steps but staying out of sight. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just because I was alone in a place with no noise and no people. But the feeling didn't fade. It grew heavier with each turn of the trail. By late afternoon, I realized I was off my planned route. The markers had stopped. I should have turned around the moment I noticed, but I kept thinking I could reconnect with the trail if I just went a little farther. That was a mistake. The ground dropped into a long, uneven slope full of old roots and loose stones. I had to move carefully, watching every step so I wouldn't twist my ankle or fall. Halfway down, I felt something shift in the air. Not a sound, not a shape, just the sense that someone was standing behind me, too close. I froze and listened. The forest stayed completely silent. I forced myself to keep moving, trying to stay calm, but the feeling didn't go away. It clung to me. At the bottom of the slope, I found something that made my stomach twist. A small clearing with the remains of an old tent, torn open and half buried under leaves. The poles were bent, and the fabric looked slashed instead of weather damaged. Around it, the ground was trampled in a chaotic pattern, as if someone had been running or dragging something. I walked around slowly, studying every detail. The air felt wrong there, thick and stale, like nothing had moved for a long time. I didn't want to stay. Every nerve in my body told me I needed to leave that spot immediately. I forced myself to move fast, heading uphill through an area with no trail at all. Branches scratched my arms, roots caught around my boots, and my breath grew sharp and uneven. The light faded faster than it should have, and I knew I was running out of time to find a safe place before dark. I kept hearing small snaps behind me, soft cracks, movements that stopped the moment I stopped moving. I didn't want to turn around because I didn't want to see anything there. My heart was beating so hard it felt like it might burst. By the time I reached flatter ground, the sky was turning orange. I couldn't risk walking in the dark, so I decided to camp even though everything in me wanted to keep moving. I found a small patch of ground between two thick trees. I set up the tent as fast as I could, checking the area again and again even though nothing visible was there. When I crawled inside, the thin fabric felt useless, like it couldn't keep anything out. Night settled fast, swallowing the forest in complete darkness. I lay still, listening to the quiet. For a while, nothing happened. Then I heard it. Soft footsteps in the leaves, slow and careful, circling the area around my tent. My whole body froze. The steps stopped, then started again from another angle. I didn't move, didn't breathe too deeply, didn't even shift the sleeping bag. I stayed perfectly still while something or someone walked around me in the dark, never coming close, never going far, just tracing the same slow circle again and again. Hours passed like that. I didn't sleep at all. When the steps finally stopped, the silence became even worse. I waited until the faintest light touched the fabric of the tent before I dared move. The moment it was bright enough to see, I packed everything in a rush. The ground around the tent had fresh prints, human-sized but sharper, like someone had stepped there with a strange kind of boot. They circled the exact area I had heard the sounds. I didn't want to spend another second there. I headed back the way I thought I came, forcing my legs to move faster than they wanted to. Every sound made me tense up. I kept checking behind me, expecting to see someone following, but the forest stayed empty. When I finally reached the main trail again, I felt a wave of relief so strong it almost made my knees give out. I kept going without stopping, pushing myself until I reached the point where the trees grew wide and the light felt normal again. By the time I reached my car, the sun was high and the whole forest behind me looked calm and harmless, like nothing had happened. But I knew better. I knew what I heard, what I saw, and what I felt all night. I drove away without looking back, but the feeling didn't leave me. Somewhere deep inside those hills, someone still walks those trails, moving quietly, watching anyone who steps too close. I didn't see them, but I know they were there, and I know I'm never going back. The ending for me became simple and clear. The forest wasn't empty, I wasn't alone, and whatever was out there wanted me to know it. That was enough to teach me that sometimes the scariest thing you can meet out in nature is not an animal or a storm, but another person who knows the woods better than you do, moves through them without a sound, and never wants to be seen. I survived the hike, but the memory stayed sharp. Even now, whenever I think about going out alone again, I remember those slow footsteps circling the tent in the dark, and I understand exactly why I will never hike that place again. I started the hike early in the morning, before the sun had fully pushed the cold darkness out of the valley. I picked a random trail on the map the night before, a long route that cut through a stretch of forest I had never explored. I wanted a quiet day alone, something to clear my head. The air felt sharp when I walked out of the parking area, and the trees stood still like they were holding their breath. I felt good, awake, and ready for a long climb. The first hour passed slowly as the path grew steeper. My legs warmed up, and my breathing fell into a steady rhythm. The trail cut along the side of a slope, with thick trees on both sides. As the light grew stronger, I could see the texture of the ground better. Wet leaves, patches of mud, thin roots crossing the path, and small stones that rolled under my shoes. It felt normal, peaceful in a simple way, like I had done this 100 times. But somewhere around the second hour, the forest changed. The air still felt cool, but there was a kind of heaviness in it now, like the whole place was waiting for something. I couldn't see any animals, not even a bird crossing overhead. That silence started to press on my mind. I tried to ignore it and pushed on. The trail became narrower as I climbed. The trees grew closer together, their lower branches twisted in strange shapes. I kept noticing small things that felt off. For example, I found a single hiking pole stuck in the ground beside a large rock. It was standing straight, like someone had pushed it deep into the soil. There were no footprints around it, no sign of anyone nearby. I tried not to think about it, but I kept wondering why someone would leave it like that. As I continued, the ground became softer. I stepped on patches of earth that sank slightly under my weight. It felt like the forest floor had been disturbed recently. A few minutes later, I found an area where the soil was turned up like something had been dragged through it. The marks ran across the trail and disappeared into the thick trees on the other side. I couldn't tell what had caused them. They didn't look like animal tracks. They were long, smooth lines, inconsistent, like something heavy had been pulled over the dirt. I felt a cold pressure in my chest as I stared at them. I kept going because turning back felt worse somehow. I didn't want to admit that the random trail I picked might have been a mistake. The deeper I went, the stranger everything became. I found small piles of stones in different places, stacked too neatly to be natural. Some were sitting right in the middle of the trail. They weren't tall, but they were placed with care, like someone had arranged them for a reason. They didn't feel like markers either. They felt like warnings, but I didn't know what they were warning me about. The forest got darker even though the sun was probably high by then. The trail dipped into a stretch where the trees grew so tall and so close that almost no light made it through. I felt uneasy walking through it. My footsteps sounded too loud. Every time a leaf moved behind me, I felt my skin crawl. I kept glancing back even though I knew I wouldn't see anything. My mind told me it was just the wind, but there was barely any wind that day. I climbed a long hill that felt much steeper than it looked on the map. When I reached the top, I saw something that made my stomach tighten. There was a backpack lying on its side near the roots of a tree. It looked worn and dirty, as if it had been there for days. The zipper was half open. I didn't touch it. I didn't want to. Something about it felt wrong, like touching it would pull me into something I didn't want to know. I walked around it and kept moving. My heartbeat was faster now, and I could feel sweat building under my shirt even though the air was cool. I tried to convince myself that people leave things behind all the time. Maybe someone dropped it. Maybe they planned to come back for it. But the doubt in my mind grew heavier with every step. Not long after, I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, almost unnoticeable, like something old and rotten far away. But the deeper I went, the stronger it became. It wasn't the smell of a dead animal. It was sharper, more sour, like something decaying in the cold. It felt unnatural for the forest. I tried breathing through my mouth, but the odor worked its way in anyway. The trail started to descend suddenly, cutting down between thick rocks and fallen trees. The smell was strongest here. I stopped once, bending forward slightly, trying to breathe slowly so I wouldn't panic. I could feel a deep instinct inside me, the kind that rises when something is wrong even if you can't see it. Then I heard it, soft, quick footsteps somewhere behind me. They weren't heavy like a large animal. They were light, irregular, like someone stepping carefully but not carefully enough. I didn't turn around right away. I just stood still, staring at the ground, feeling my pulse in my ears. When I finally looked back, there was nothing on the trail, just trees and dark spaces between them. But the feeling didn't leave. I knew something had moved. I started walking faster. My legs burned, but I didn't slow down. Every few minutes, I heard faint sounds behind me. Twigs snapping, leaves shifting, something brushing against a tree trunk. I never saw anything when I looked. That made it worse. Whatever it was, it knew how to stay out of sight. The trail twisted left, then right, then dropped sharply again. I realized I had no idea how far I'd gone. I checked my phone, but there was no signal and the battery had dropped faster than it normally did. I stuffed it back in my pocket and kept moving. At some point, I noticed the footprints. They weren't mine. They were on parts of the path I hadn't walked yet. They were spaced unevenly, like whoever made them was limping or unsteady. Some looked fresh. The edges were crisp. The soil around them was still slightly wet. I felt a deep chill crawl up my spine. I kept going until the trail leveled out. Then I heard the footsteps again, this time closer. They were fast, as if whatever had been moving behind me had decided to close the distance. I didn't look back. Couldn't. All I could do was walk faster, almost jogging now. My breath shook in my chest, but I forced myself forward. The trail finally widened and I saw the faint shape of a trail marker nailed to a tree ahead. It meant I was close to the loop that would lead back toward the start. I pushed harder, ignoring the burning in my legs. The footsteps behind me grew softer, then faded completely as I neared the exposed part of the trail. When the trees finally thinned and the light grew brighter, I felt a wave of relief sink through me. The open space felt safe. The silence here sounded normal again. I didn't stop walking until I reached the parking area, and even then I didn't look back toward the forest. I unlocked my car with shaking hands and sat inside for a long moment, trying to calm my breathing. By the time I drove away, the forest looked peaceful in the rearview mirror, as if nothing had happened inside it. But I knew what I felt. Something had followed me in those woods. Something real. Something alive. Not a ghost, not a story. Just something that existed out there, hidden, silent, and watching. And the trail I had picked at random never felt random again after that day. I never returned to that part of the forest. I never took a trail without studying it closely again. And every time I hike now, I listen more carefully to the silence, because I learned that day how quickly peace can turn into fear, and how something you never see can come closer than you ever realize until it's almost too late. The morning was cold, the kind of cold that sneaks into your bones and makes the air feel sharp against your skin. I set out early, just me and my pack, eager to get into the woods before the sun climbed high. The trail was one I'd never tried before, a narrow path that twisted into a dense forest far from any town or road. It was supposed to be quiet, peaceful, a chance to be alone with nature and clear my head. The ground beneath my boots was soft with fallen leaves, wet from last night's rain, and the air smelled earthy and fresh. The trees were tall, thick with rough bark and tangled branches that reached out like giant arms overhead. As I walked, I could hear the steady crunch of leaves and twigs breaking underfoot, the soft rustling of wind through the leaves, and somewhere far off, the distant call of a bird. I was about 2 hours in when the trail started to get harder to follow. The markers on the trees were faint or missing altogether. At first, I thought maybe the path just narrowed because fewer people used it. But soon, the trail became almost invisible under thick brush and fallen branches. I stopped several times, checking my map and compass, trying to match the winding turns with the landmarks on my map. It wasn't adding up. I kept moving forward anyway, telling myself I'd find the trail again soon. But after another hour, the forest grew denser, darker, and the air felt heavier, like it was pressing down on me. The sunlight barely filtered through the thick canopy, and shadows spread like dark pools on the ground. My heart started to beat a little faster, not because I was scared, but because something didn't feel right. Then I noticed the silence. The birds had stopped singing. The wind was still. It was as if the forest was holding its breath. I scanned the trees, looking for any sign of movement, but there was nothing. No animals, no birds, no rustling leaves. That's when I saw the tracks. At first, I thought they were animal tracks. Big ones, fresh, and unlike anything I'd seen before. The prints were deep in the mud, spaced far apart, like something heavy had been walking on 2 legs. The shape was odd, too long and wide to be a person's footprints, but not quite like any animal's either. I crouched down and studied them carefully. The toes were long but blunt, and the heel was broad and rounded. They led deeper into the trees, away from the path. My stomach twisted. I didn't want to think about what could have made those tracks, but I couldn't ignore them. I stood up and took a few steps back to the trail, trying to shake off the unease. I kept walking, but now I was paying more attention to every sound, every shadow. The sun was starting to lower when I realized I had been walking in circles. I stopped dead in my tracks. I pulled out my compass again. The needle wasn't steady. It wavered, spinning slowly before settling on a direction, then spinning again. I frowned and checked my map once more. I was supposed to be heading northeast, but the compass needle kept swinging. I put the compass away, relying on the sun now, but the dense trees blocked most of it. My sense of direction felt completely off. A chill ran down my back. I tried to stay calm. Maybe the compass was broken. Maybe I was just tired and confused. I shook my head, tried to focus. The forest around me was thickening with underbrush and fallen trees. I struggled to find a clear path forward. Every step was harder than the last. Then I heard it. A low, heavy breathing. Not mine. It was close, but I couldn't see anything. My heart hammered in my chest, and I froze. The breathing stopped as suddenly as it had started. I waited, eyes scanning, but the forest was empty again. I decided to keep moving, faster this time, hoping to find the trail or any sign of a clearing. My legs were sore, and my pack felt heavier with every step. The light was fading quickly now, and the shadows deepened. Suddenly, I caught sight of something ahead, a figure hunched and still, standing among the trees. My breath caught. I blinked and looked again. It was gone. Panic started to rise in my chest. I forced myself to breathe slowly, telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks after hours alone in the forest. But the feeling didn't go away. I felt watched, like someone or something was tracking my every move. I knew I had to find my way back before nightfall. I tried retracing my steps, following the prints in the mud, hoping they would lead me to safety. But the tracks seemed to disappear into a thick wall of bushes and fallen branches, impossible to cross. I found a fallen tree and climbed over it, then pushed through a tangle of branches and brambles. My clothes caught and tore, my skin scratched and bleeding from the thorns. But I didn't care. I just wanted out. Then I heard a snap, something breaking behind me. I whipped around, heart pounding, but there was nothing. The forest was still, except for my ragged breathing and the pounding of my own heart. I ran. Branches lashed at my face and arms. I stumbled over roots and rocks. The ground was uneven and slippery with mud. I didn't look back, but I could feel something chasing me. Not fast, but steady. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I broke through the trees and saw the trail again. Relief crashed over me like a wave. I collapsed onto the path, gasping for breath. The sun was gone now, replaced by a dim twilight. I took out my phone, hoping for signal. Nothing. I knew I had to keep moving. I followed the trail, careful not to trip. My legs were shaking, but I kept going. After another hour, I finally reached the edge of the forest. The trees opened up to a small dirt road. There, in the fading light, I saw a pickup truck parked at the side. I ran toward it, waving my arms. The driver inside saw me and rolled down the window. Without words, he gestured for me to get in. Safe inside the truck's warmth, I told him about the tracks, the breathing, the feeling of being watched. He nodded slowly and said something about people who live off the grid nearby, people who don't like visitors. He explained that the area was known for rough, sometimes dangerous locals who didn't hesitate to scare off or even attack hikers. The tracks I saw? Probably a man or men tracking the trail, warning others or watching for strangers. That night, I stayed with the driver at a nearby town, grateful for the company and safety. The forest was no longer just trees and silence. It was a place where danger lurked quietly, watching. I learned that sometimes the scariest things aren't ghosts or monsters, but real people, and the wilderness can hide threats that are all too real. I'll never forget the weight of those heavy tracks in the mud, or the sound of that breath close behind me, reminding me how alone I truly was in those woods. The forest had almost swallowed me whole, but I made it out, just barely. I started the hike early in the morning, thinking it would be a simple loop around a remote trail I had never tried before. I had picked it at random from a map the night before, wanting something quiet and away from people. The sky was dull and heavy when I parked my car on the narrow dirt pull-off at the edge of the forest. The air felt colder than I expected, sharp enough that each breath stung a little. I remember feeling excited at first, because the trail looked untouched, almost forgotten, with grass pushing up between old footprints and the soil still dark from a recent rain. As I walked deeper into the woods, the sounds changed. At the start, I heard the usual noises: birds, insects, the low rustle of branches. But after half an hour, everything felt quieter. The trees stood close together, their trunks dark and damp, and the light barely reached the ground. My boots sank into soft mud. I kept noticing how narrow the path became, the way roots twisted up like ropes that wanted to catch my ankles. I had to watch every step. Even though it was early in the day, the air under the trees felt cold and still, like the forest was holding its breath. After another long stretch, I reached a steep incline. The trail cut upward along the side of a ridge, and the soil kept sliding under my feet. I moved slowly, gripping the rocks and roots, trying to stay steady. The higher I climbed, the more I felt the burn in my legs, but I kept going because I wanted to reach the top and get a better view. When I finally reached the ridge, I noticed how different the air felt. It was windier up there, colder, and even more silent. I could see the forest stretching out for miles, dark and endless. The trail continued along the ridge, thin and uneven, and I followed it because turning back felt wrong. I had only been hiking for maybe 2 hours, and I didn't want to quit. The ridge trail felt strange. Every step made the small stones shift and roll down the steep drop on my right side. The slope wasn't something anyone could survive if they slipped. The dirt was loose, and even a small mistake would send me sliding down 100 feet into thick branches and sharp rocks. I kept moving, but slower now, every muscle tight. At one point, I stopped to catch my breath and felt something like a faint vibration under my boots, like the ground wasn't fully solid. I brushed it off as nerves and kept walking. About 20 minutes later, the trail suddenly dipped downward into a narrow gully. The dirt here was darker, almost black, and soaked from the rain. My boots sank with each step, making wet sucking sounds. The trees here were different, taller, thinner, and almost all bent in the same direction, like something strong had pushed them all at once. The air felt heavy, and I kept wiping my face because it felt like something was sticking to my skin, even though nothing was there. I remember the smell too, earthy, like wet soil that had been turned over recently. As I moved further in, the trail disappeared. It didn't fade slowly. It just ended, as if someone had cut it off. The ground ahead was uneven, covered with thick brush and fallen branches. I stood there for a moment, trying to understand how a marked trail could just stop. But the more I looked around, the more I realized I had made a mistake somewhere earlier. The ridge must have had a point where the trail turned, and I missed it. I checked the small space behind me, hoping to see some sign of where I came from, but everything looked the same now. It was only then that something cold settled in my stomach. I wasn't on a trail anymore. I was just in the woods. I tried to keep calm and move back the way I thought I came, but the ground felt different under my feet. The mud was deeper, the roots sharper, the incline steeper. After a few minutes, the trees seemed to close in tighter. Every step felt harder than the last. I moved faster, thinking I could retrace my path before it got worse, but my legs kept slipping on the wet ground. At one point, the toe of my boot caught under a buried root, and I fell hard onto my side. The impact knocked the air out of me. My ribs throbbed as I pushed myself back up. When I looked at my hands, they were covered in mud and small cuts from the sharp debris on the ground. When I finally got my breath back, I kept moving uphill, thinking that if I could reach the ridge again, I could find the path. But the slope didn't match what I remembered. It was too steep, too uneven. My legs kept sliding backward each time I tried to climb. At one point, I grabbed onto a tree trunk to pull myself up, and the bark peeled off in my hands like it was rotting from the inside. The tree leaned a little from the pull, and something about that movement made my heart jump. The forest felt unstable, like everything around me was slowly shifting, waiting for me to lose balance. I stopped again to steady myself, breathing hard, sweat stinging my eyes even in the cold air. The forest around me looked the same in every direction. Thin, tall trees, damp soil, no trail, no sign of where I came from. A faint panic started to creep up my spine. I forced myself to take slow breaths and kept moving, choosing a direction that seemed to climb upward. I didn't know if it was right, but staying still felt worse. After what felt like an hour, my legs were shaking. My shoulders ached from grabbing onto branches and pulling myself up. Every part of me felt heavy. Then I reached a section of the woods where the trees thinned slightly and the ground leveled out. I stood there, breathing deeply, trying to figure out what to do next. That was when I heard it. Something faint, something moving through the brush far behind me. It wasn't an animal running or taking quick steps. It was slow, steady, pushing through the undergrowth with weight. Each sound made the hairs on my arms stand up. I didn't turn around. I just started walking again, faster than before. The forest floor became rough again. I kept stumbling, kept pushing forward. Every few minutes, I heard that same slow movement somewhere behind me, always at the same distance, never getting closer but never going away. It felt like something was following my path, not rushing, not hiding, just moving where I moved. The fear built slowly, heavier with each step. I kept walking until the light changed. The trees began to spread apart, and the air felt different. When I stepped out from the last row of trunks, I found myself standing at the edge of a long, empty service road carved through the forest. The sight of open space hit me so hard I almost fell to my knees. I staggered forward and followed the road, hoping it would lead somewhere familiar. After about 15 minutes, I saw a faint shape in the distance. My parked car. My legs were shaking so badly by the time I reached it that I had trouble getting the door open. When I climbed inside, I locked the doors out of instinct, even though I knew there was no reason to. The quiet inside the car felt unreal. My hands were trembling as I started the engine and pulled away from the woods. I kept checking the mirrors even though I knew nothing was behind me. When I finally reached the main road and saw the open sky again, something in my chest loosened. I realized how close I had come to getting trapped in that forest, how easily a simple random choice on a map had almost turned into a disaster. By the time I got home, my clothes were stiff with dried mud, my ribs still aching from the fall, and my mind replaying every step I took in those trees. The trail had looked calm and quiet in the morning, but the truth is simple, and I understood it clearly by the end of that day. The woods don't care if you're ready, they don't care if you're confident, and they don't care how harmless a hike looks on a map. If you make one mistake, take one wrong turn, or ignore one small detail, the forest can close around you without warning. And if you're unlucky, it won't let you find your way out again. I was lucky. I walked away, but I still think about that slow, steady sound moving behind me, matching my path step by step, never rushing. I don't know what it was, but I know this much. It was real, and it stayed with me until the moment I stepped out of those trees. The ending was clear the moment I reached the road. I survived, but I also learned that the woods can turn dangerous in the simplest ways, and I have never trusted a random trail again since that day. I set out early in the morning, carrying a backpack filled with the basics: water, some snacks, a first aid kit, and a map I had printed out a few days before. The forest was thick around the trailhead, the trees close together with branches tangled high above. The sun was just starting to rise, casting a soft orange glow through the leaves. It was quiet except for the sound of my boots crunching on the gravel path and the occasional call of a bird somewhere far off. The air was cool but fresh, and I felt ready for the day ahead. The trail was supposed to be about 8 miles long, looping around a small ridge before coming back to the parking lot. According to the map, there were a few clearings and some steep spots, but nothing too difficult. I had hiked alone before and felt confident in my ability to handle the terrain. My phone had no signal here, but I wasn't worried. I trusted the map and my own sense of direction. As I moved deeper into the woods, the trees thickened, and the path narrowed. The sounds of civilization disappeared, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. My breathing grew steady, my mind focused on each step. About 2 miles in, the trail crossed a small stream. The water was clear and cold, running over smooth stones. I knelt down to fill my bottle and took a long drink before continuing. The climb began shortly after the stream. The ground sloped upward sharply, roots and rocks sticking out here and there. My legs burned as I pushed myself higher, but the view started to open up. Patches of blue sky peeked through the canopy, and in the distance, I could see the tops of other hills covered in dark green forest. The smell of damp earth and pine filled my nose. I stopped at a small clearing to catch my breath and eat a granola bar. The sun was higher now, warming the air, but a light breeze kept things comfortable. The trail ahead looked rougher, with loose gravel and uneven footing. I tightened the straps on my boots and pressed on. Around this point, I began to notice something strange. The forest seemed quieter. Not just the usual calm of the woods, but an almost unnatural silence. The birds had stopped singing. No insects buzzed near me. Even the wind seemed to have dropped away. It felt like the forest was holding its breath. I tried to shake off the feeling and focused on the trail. The map said the ridge was just beyond a thick stand of fir trees. I reached that point after another half hour of climbing. The trees here were tall and close together, their trunks thick with rough bark. The ground beneath was covered in pine needles, soft but uneven. That's when I saw it. A set of footprints in the dirt, fresh and clear. They looked like boot prints, maybe from a pair of heavy hiking boots or work boots. I had been alone on the trail so far, and I didn't see any other cars at the parking lot when I arrived. The prints were heading deeper into the forest, off the marked path. I stared at them for a moment, a chill running down my spine. My first thought was to turn back, but something made me keep looking. The prints were big, maybe size 11 or 12. They were spaced far apart, like the person who made them was walking quickly or had long legs. The dirt was still soft, so they couldn't be more than a few hours old. I debated what to do. Following the prints could be dangerous. Someone else in the woods meant an unpredictable situation. But part of me was curious. I decided to keep an eye on them as I continued on the main trail, hoping to catch sight of whoever had passed this way. After about 20 minutes, the trail curved around a bend, and I spotted something ahead, a small campsite. It looked recently used. There was a circle of stones for a fire, some crushed grass where a tent might have been, and scattered bits of trash. A plastic bottle, a torn piece of cloth. No one was there now. The quiet still pressed down. I scanned the trees, half expecting to see someone watching from the shadows, but the woods were empty. The sun was moving toward the west, and I realized I had already spent more time than planned on this part of the trail. I decided to head back toward the parking lot, retracing my steps. The prints were no longer visible on the main path, but as I walked, I kept glancing into the woods, uneasy. Suddenly, I heard it, a loud crack, like a broken branch snapping under weight. I froze, listening. Nothing else, just silence. My heart sped up. I quickened my pace but tried not to run. Then the sound again, this time closer and more deliberate. Something was moving in the underbrush off the side of the trail. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear leaves rustling, twigs breaking. I tried to stay calm and kept walking steadily, eyes darting toward the noise. I didn't want to turn around, but the feeling of being watched was growing stronger. I reached a bend and saw a large fallen tree blocking part of the trail. I climbed over it carefully, keeping my backpack balanced. That's when I noticed a shape among the trees, about 20 yards away. It was tall, wearing dark clothing, standing still. I couldn't see a face, but the outline was clear. My breath caught. I didn't move. The figure suddenly stepped back into the woods and disappeared. I didn't wait to see more. I moved faster, heart pounding, every muscle tense. The forest seemed to close in around me as I pushed through the last miles back to the trailhead. When I finally reached the parking lot, my legs were shaking and sweat poured down my face. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the trees. My car was still there, untouched, but the silence felt heavy. I locked the doors and sat inside for a moment, catching my breath. Then I pulled out my phone and checked for signal. Still none. I tried again a few minutes later, and this time there was a weak bar. I called 911 and reported what I'd seen, the footprints, the figure, and the feeling of being followed. They told me to stay where I was until someone arrived. About 30 minutes later, a park ranger showed up. He listened carefully as I described everything and took notes. Then he told me there had been reports of a man living illegally in the forest, someone dangerous who had been spotted by other hikers but never caught. The ranger promised to increase patrols and asked me to be careful if I hiked again. I thanked him, still shaken, and drove home. The whole experience stayed with me. The woods are beautiful, but they're also wild and unpredictable. You never know who or what might be out there watching from the shadows. After that day, I made a rule to stick strictly to marked trails, hike only with others, and always tell someone where I'm going. The forest is no place for careless wandering, and sometimes the scariest moments come from real life, real people, rather than stories or myths. That day, I learned how thin the line is between nature's peace and its danger, and how important it is to respect it. I set out early that morning, carrying a pack heavier than I wanted but full of everything I thought I'd need. The trail was supposed to be simple, a loop through a patch of dense forest near the mountains. I had planned this hike for weeks, looking forward to the quiet and the chance to clear my head. The sky was overcast, the clouds thick but not yet threatening rain. The air was cool, almost cold, and smelled of pine and wet earth, perfect for a day on the trail. The first few miles were peaceful. The dirt path wound between tall trees, their trunks rough and mossy. I stepped carefully over roots and rocks, feeling the crunch of leaves and twigs under my boots. Birds called high in the branches, and a breeze stirred the needles overhead. I kept my pace steady, focusing on the rhythm of my steps. My breathing was calm, steady. The world was quiet except for the natural sounds of the forest. About 2 hours in, the trail began to change. It narrowed and twisted more sharply, climbing steeply over rocky outcrops. The trees grew thicker, blocking out more of the sky. Shadows stretched long between the trunks, and the temperature seemed to drop a few degrees. I could feel the dampness in the air increase, like the forest was holding its breath. I stopped for a moment at a bend where the trail cut through a thick patch of ferns and low bushes. The ground was uneven here, muddy in places from the recent rain. I pulled out my water bottle and took a few sips, glancing around. Something felt off. I couldn't explain it at first. No animals rushing off, no strange sounds. Just an uneasy silence. The kind you notice when everything else is too quiet. I pressed on, the feeling growing stronger. The trees on either side seemed to close in, their branches like arms reaching toward the trail. My steps slowed as I kept looking around, scanning the shadows. I told myself it was just the forest, old, dense, and sometimes a little scary if you're alone. After another half hour, I reached a small clearing. The sun broke through the clouds just enough to light the area, and I felt a little better. There was an old wooden bench there, cracked and weathered by time. I set my pack down and took a long drink of water. I sat for a few minutes, resting my legs and trying to shake the unease. The wind picked up slightly, rattling the dry leaves on the ground. I noticed something strange: footprints. They were fresh, muddied, and not like any animal tracks I'd seen. They looked human. My heart beat faster. I scanned the clearing and the edges of the trees. No one was around. The footprints led into the woods, going off the trail in a direction I hadn't planned to go. I thought about following them, but my gut told me not to. Still, I took a picture with my phone just in case. After packing up, I headed back to the trail, but something had changed. The quiet was heavier, thicker. The forest felt like it was watching me. I started walking faster, but the path ahead seemed unfamiliar. The trees looked different. The trail markers I had seen earlier were gone or broken. Panic started to rise inside me. I stopped and pulled out my phone. No signal, no GPS, just the time and battery percentage. I tried to stay calm, telling myself I had the map on paper. But the map looked vague, just a rough sketch of the main trail. I wasn't sure where I was exactly. I kept moving, eyes peeled for anything that looked familiar. Branches snapped somewhere to my left, and I froze. My skin prickled, every nerve alert. I told myself it was just a deer or some other animal, but the sound was too close and too deliberate. The forest seemed to shift around me. I passed a fallen tree and then a cluster of rocks that I thought I'd seen earlier. But when I looked back, the path behind me didn't look the same. It was narrower, darker, and twisted in ways I didn't remember. I tried calling out, but my voice felt swallowed by the trees. No answer. I kept walking, pushing branches aside, stepping over roots. Every so often, I caught a glimpse of movement in the corner of my eye, shadows, maybe a person. I didn't want to turn around and look. Time passed. Hours, I think. The sun lowered in the sky, and the forest grew colder. My legs ached, my throat was dry, and I was starting to feel a growing weight of fear. I realized I had no idea where the trail was anymore. I was lost. I pulled out my map again, folding and unfolding it, trying to find any landmark. Then I remembered the footprints. They had seemed fresh, like someone else had been here recently. Maybe they were still nearby. I debated following them again, but something told me it was too risky. I sat on a fallen log, catching my breath and trying to think. I needed a plan. I remembered what I'd read about lost hikers. Stay put if you can't find the trail. Conserve energy. Make yourself visible. I decided to wait where I was, but then I noticed something else. Faint noises in the distance, the sound of a motor or a car. It was faint but real. I stood up and looked in the direction of the sound. There was a thin line of smoke rising through the trees. That had to be from a campfire or maybe a car. I grabbed my pack and started moving toward the smoke, trying to keep my steps quiet and careful. The forest seemed to grow denser, but the smoke was still there, a small hope. After what felt like an eternity, I broke through the trees into a small clearing. There was a campsite, a fire pit with some ashes, a broken tent, and an empty backpack. No people. The place looked abandoned, but signs told me someone had been here recently. I called out again, but silence. I felt a mix of relief and worry. Relief that I was close to other people, worry because no one was here now. I decided to stay near the clearing and make myself visible. I gathered dry branches and started a small fire, using the lighter I had in my pack. The fire grew slowly, sending thin curls of smoke up through the trees. I stayed near the fire, watching the woods, listening for any sounds. Night began to fall, and the forest grew colder and darker. I felt alone but also alert, knowing I had to stay awake until help came or until I could find my way out. The fire was my lifeline. I fed it small sticks, keeping the flame alive. I kept my phone close, ready to use the flashlight if needed. Hours passed slowly, the forest around me quiet except for the crackle of burning wood. Then, finally, I heard voices in the distance, human voices. They were faint but unmistakable. I shouted and waved my arms, trying to make myself seen. The voices grew louder, and a light appeared moving through the trees. A group of hikers came into the clearing, their flashlights cutting through the dark. They looked surprised to find me, but relieved. They had been searching for me since the park rangers were alerted about my missing status earlier that day. They had followed the same footprints I had seen and found the abandoned campsite. I was safe. The feeling of relief was overwhelming. The group helped me pack up and guided me back to the main trail, which wasn't far from the clearing. The path back felt easier, lighter, like the forest had let go of its grip. When we reached the park entrance, I told them everything I remembered. The footprints, the strange silence, the lost trail. The rangers said they had found some signs of people trespassing in that part of the forest recently and warned hikers to stick to marked trails. Looking back, I realized how quickly a day of peaceful hiking could turn into something terrifying, just by getting off the path and losing your way. The forest was not magical or haunted. It was real and wild, dangerous if you're unprepared or alone. That day taught me to respect the wilderness, to trust my instincts, and to always be ready for the unexpected. I still hike, but now I do it with more caution and respect for the land and its quiet, sometimes harsh, reality. I decided to go hiking alone on a weekend, wanting a break from everything. The trail I picked was in a remote forest area known for its beauty but also for being rough and less traveled. I packed my gear carefully: water, some food, a first aid kit, a flashlight, and my phone with a map app downloaded just in case. The morning air was cool and crisp as I parked my car at the trailhead. The sky was clear with the sun just starting to rise, casting a golden light through the trees. I felt good and ready to spend the day out there. The path started easy enough, wide and well-marked with bright orange ribbons tied to branches here and there. I walked steadily, enjoying the sounds of the forest, the birds chirping, leaves rustling, and the distant call of a woodpecker. Every few minutes, I stopped to take in the scenery. The tall trees stretched high, their branches forming a leafy roof that filtered the sunlight into scattered patches on the forest floor. The smell of pine and damp earth filled the air, fresh and clean. As I moved deeper into the forest, the trail narrowed and the undergrowth grew thicker, but it was still easy to follow. Around midday, I reached a small clearing where I decided to rest and eat some snacks. I sat on a fallen log and drank water, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. I looked at the map and saw I was about halfway to a ridge that promised a great view. After the break, I packed up and continued, feeling more energized. The trail began to climb more steeply now. My legs worked harder as I stepped over rocks and tree roots, and I started to sweat despite the cool breeze. The forest seemed quieter, and the shadows grew longer. I noticed the orange ribbons became less frequent, but I thought maybe it was just a less maintained section. I kept my eyes on the map and the path, trusting I was still going the right way. Suddenly, the trail vanished. The dirt path was replaced by thick bushes and fallen branches. I stopped and looked around, but no ribbons or signs were visible. My heart rate quickened a bit, but I told myself not to panic. I took out my phone and opened the map app. The GPS showed my location, but the signal was weak, and the terrain lines didn't match exactly what I was seeing. It was frustrating, but I tried to orient myself. I backtracked a little and tried to find the trail again, stepping carefully to avoid twisting an ankle. After about 15 minutes, I found a faint path, narrower than before and overgrown with brush. I started walking, hoping it would connect back to the main trail. The forest was thick here, and the light was dimming under the dense canopy. I felt a growing unease, but I pushed it aside, telling myself I had been in worse situations. After another 30 minutes, I came to a small stream. The water was clear and cold, trickling over rocks. I stopped to refill my water bottle and rest. While sitting by the stream, I heard something move in the bushes behind me. I turned quickly but saw nothing except the wind shaking leaves. My nerves jumped. I shook my head and laughed quietly at myself for being paranoid. The forest was full of animals, after all. I decided to follow the stream downstream, thinking it might lead to a road or a more familiar place. The ground near the water was slippery with moss, and the trail was hard to follow. Branches scraped my arms, and I stumbled once or twice, but I kept going. After walking for almost an hour along the stream, the sun was sinking low, and the shadows became long and dark. I realized I had no clear idea where I was. My phone battery was low, and the signal was gone. Panic started to set in. I sat down again, breathing heavily, trying to calm myself. I looked around, hoping to spot any sign of the trail or a landmark. The forest felt different now, quieter and more oppressive. The trees seemed to close in, and every sound echoed louder in the stillness. I thought about what I should do next. Stay put and wait for help? Try to find my way back? The problem was, I wasn't sure which way was back anymore. I decided to keep moving, hoping to find the trail or a road before dark. I followed the stream a bit further until the ground sloped upwards sharply. I climbed carefully, holding onto roots and rocks for support. When I reached the top, I was met with a view, but it was not the one I had hoped for. Instead of the wide, beautiful ridge I had read about, I saw thick forest stretching endlessly in every direction. No roads, no signs of civilization. My heart sank. The sun was almost gone, and the sky turned a deep orange red. I knew I had to find shelter soon. I didn't want to be caught out here in the dark. I walked down the slope and searched for a place to camp. I found a small flat spot near some bushes and set down my pack. Using the flashlight, I gathered dry leaves and sticks to make a fire. Starting it was hard with my shaky hands, but after several tries, the flames caught. The firelight gave me a little comfort in the growing darkness. I ate the rest of my snacks and drank water, listening to the crackling fire. That night was the hardest part. The forest noises seemed louder and closer in the dark. Every crack of a branch or rustle in the leaves made me jump. I kept the fire going as long as I could, knowing it might keep animals away and give me some warmth. I tried to rest but barely slept, feeling cold and tense. At first light, I packed up quickly, determined to get out. I studied the map on my phone one last time and then started walking in what I guessed was the direction back to the car. The morning light helped, and the forest didn't seem as scary now. I kept following the sun's position, using it as a guide. After a few hours of walking, I finally saw something that gave me hope. A dirt road cutting through the trees. I hurried toward it and then saw my car parked just where I had left it. Relief flooded me, and I sank into the seat, exhausted but safe. I turned the key and started the engine, feeling a deep gratitude for being alive and unharmed. The forest had tested me, but I made it through. That day taught me how important it is to be prepared and to trust my instincts. Hiking alone can be beautiful but also dangerous, and sometimes the scariest moments come not from monsters or ghosts, but from getting lost, cold, and truly alone in the wild. I decided to go hiking alone on a weekend, wanting a break from everything. The trail I picked was in a remote forest area known for its beauty but also for being rough and less traveled. I packed my gear carefully: water, some food, a first aid kit, a flashlight, and my phone with a map app downloaded just in case. The morning air was cool and crisp as I parked my car at the trailhead. The sky was clear with the sun just starting to rise, casting a golden light through the trees. I felt good and ready to spend the day out there. The path started easy enough, wide and well-marked with bright orange ribbons tied to branches here and there. I walked steadily, enjoying the sounds of the forest, the birds chirping, leaves rustling, and the distant call of a woodpecker. Every few minutes, I stopped to take in the scenery. The tall trees stretched high, their branches forming a leafy roof that filtered the sunlight into scattered patches on the forest floor. The smell of pine and damp earth filled the air, fresh and clean. As I moved deeper into the forest, the trail narrowed and the undergrowth grew thicker, but it was still easy to follow. Around midday, I reached a small clearing where I decided to rest and eat some snacks. I sat on a fallen log and drank water, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. I looked at the map and saw I was about halfway to a ridge that promised a great view. After the break, I packed up and continued, feeling more energized. The trail began to climb more steeply now. My legs worked harder as I stepped over rocks and tree roots, and I started to sweat despite the cool breeze. The forest seemed quieter, and the shadows grew longer. I noticed the orange ribbons became less frequent, but I thought maybe it was just a less maintained section. I kept my eyes on the map and the path, trusting I was still going the right way. Suddenly, the trail vanished. The dirt path was replaced by thick bushes and fallen branches. I stopped and looked around, but no ribbons or signs were visible. My heart rate quickened a bit, but I told myself not to panic. I took out my phone and opened the map app. The GPS showed my location, but the signal was weak, and the terrain lines didn't match exactly what I was seeing. It was frustrating, but I tried to orient myself. I backtracked a little and tried to find the trail again, stepping carefully to avoid twisting an ankle. After about 15 minutes, I found a faint path, narrower than before and overgrown with brush. I started walking, hoping it would connect back to the main trail. The forest was thick here, and the light was dimming under the dense canopy. I felt a growing unease, but I pushed it aside, telling myself I had been in worse situations. After another 30 minutes, I came to a small stream. The water was clear and cold, trickling over rocks. I stopped to refill my water bottle and rest. While sitting by the stream, I heard something move in the bushes behind me. I turned quickly but saw nothing except the wind shaking leaves. My nerves jumped. I shook my head and laughed quietly at myself for being paranoid. The forest was full of animals, after all. I decided to follow the stream downstream, thinking it might lead to a road or a more familiar place. The ground near the water was slippery with moss, and the trail was hard to follow. Branches scraped my arms, and I stumbled once or twice, but I kept going. After walking for almost an hour along the stream, the sun was sinking low, and the shadows became long and dark. I realized I had no clear idea where I was. My phone battery was low, and the signal was gone. Panic started to set in. I sat down again, breathing heavily, trying to calm myself. I looked around, hoping to spot any sign of the trail or a landmark. The forest felt different now, quieter and more oppressive. The trees seemed to close in, and every sound echoed louder in the stillness. I thought about what I should do next. Stay put and wait for help? Try to find my way back? The problem was, I wasn't sure which way was back anymore. I decided to keep moving, hoping to find the trail or a road before dark. I followed the stream a bit further until the ground sloped upwards sharply. I climbed carefully, holding onto roots and rocks for support. When I reached the top, I was met with a view, but it was not the one I had hoped for. Instead of the wide, beautiful ridge I had read about, I saw thick forest stretching endlessly in every direction. No roads, no signs of civilization. My heart sank. The sun was almost gone, and the sky turned a deep orange red. I knew I had to find shelter soon. I didn't want to be caught out here in the dark. I walked down the slope and searched for a place to camp. I found a small flat spot near some bushes and set down my pack. Using the flashlight, I gathered dry leaves and sticks to make a fire. Starting it was hard with my shaky hands, but after several tries, the flames caught. The firelight gave me a little comfort in the growing darkness. I ate the rest of my snacks and drank water, listening to the crackling fire. That night was the hardest part. The forest noises seemed louder and closer in the dark. Every crack of a branch or rustle in the leaves made me jump. I kept the fire going as long as I could, knowing it might keep animals away and give me some warmth. I tried to rest but barely slept, feeling cold and tense. At first light, I packed up quickly, determined to get out. I studied the map on my phone one last time and then started walking in what I guessed was the direction back to the car. The morning light helped, and the forest didn't seem as scary now. I kept following the sun's position, using it as a guide. After a few hours of walking, I finally saw something that gave me hope. A dirt road cutting through the trees. I hurried toward it and then saw my car parked just where I had left it. Relief flooded me, and I sank into the seat, exhausted but safe. I turned the key and started the engine, feeling a deep gratitude for being alive and unharmed. The forest had tested me, but I made it through. That day taught me how important it is to be prepared and to trust my instincts. Hiking alone can be beautiful but also dangerous, and sometimes the scariest moments come not from monsters or ghosts, but from getting lost, cold, and truly alone in the wild. I set out early in the morning, just after the sun started to push its light through the thick trees of the forest. The trail I chose was one I had never been on before. A narrow, winding path marked only on a faded map I found in an old guidebook at the library. It was supposed to be a quiet, lesser-known hike, which was exactly what I wanted. I needed time alone, away from the noise of the city and the constant buzz of people. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. My boots crunched on the dry leaves scattered across the trail. The forest was alive with small sounds, the occasional snap of a twig, the rustle of a squirrel in the underbrush, and the faint whistle of birds. I had packed light, a backpack with water, some snacks, a first aid kit, a flashlight, and my phone, although I knew the signal would likely be weak or non-existent. The trail climbed steadily, winding between tall trees that blocked most of the sky. The sunlight that did reach the forest floor came in patches, painting the leaves and moss in dappled gold. Every few minutes, I stopped to take a breath and drink some water, checking my surroundings carefully. It was peaceful, but there was something in the stillness that made me a bit uneasy, like the forest was holding its breath. After about an hour, I reached a small clearing. The trees opened up to reveal a rocky hill covered in thick grass and wildflowers. From here, I could see a wider stretch of the forest beyond, a sea of green rolling into the distance. I sat down on a large flat stone to rest, eating some granola and sipping water. The wind picked up slightly, making the tall grass sway and bringing a cool breeze to my face. When I got up to continue, I noticed the trail ahead was less clear. The path seemed to disappear into a dense thicket of bushes and fallen branches. I hesitated but decided to push forward anyway. I figured the trail must continue, just overgrown and forgotten. As I pushed through the bushes, the branches scratched at my arms and legs. The forest grew darker here, thicker. The trees stood close together, their trunks so wide and close that the sunlight barely made it through. The air felt heavier, wetter. My footsteps sounded louder in the silence, echoing oddly in this tighter space. After maybe 10 minutes, I came to a fallen tree lying across the path. It was huge, its bark rough and cracked, roots sticking out like broken fingers. I climbed over it, trying to be careful not to lose my balance. When I landed on the other side, something felt off. The air was colder, and the silence was thicker. I couldn't hear the birds anymore, only the distant sound of wind through the leaves. I checked my phone. No signal, just like I expected. I tried to focus on the path, but it was harder to see where to go next. The trail markers I had been following were gone. No ribbons, no paint marks, nothing. I looked back, and the path I came from was swallowed by the thick bushes. I felt a knot of unease growing in my stomach. I kept moving forward, hoping to find a clearing or something familiar. The ground was uneven, covered with roots and stones. I had to watch every step to avoid twisting my ankle. The trees around me seemed taller here, and the shadows stretched longer despite the time of day. My breathing felt loud in the quiet forest. Suddenly, I heard a noise, a low, scraping sound coming from just ahead. I froze, listening. It didn't sound like an animal. It was slow, rough, and steady, like something scraping against the bark of a tree. My heart started pounding. I didn't see anything, just the thick trunks and underbrush. I tried to tell myself it was just a bird or a branch moving in the wind, but the sound kept coming, slow and steady, moving closer. I looked around for a place to hide or a spot to climb. My backpack felt heavy and awkward. Then, through the trees, I caught a glimpse of a figure. At first, it looked like a shadow, but it moved with purpose. It was tall and thin, and it didn't look like an animal or a person dressed for hiking. I couldn't make out any features. The figure paused, then vanished behind the trees. Panic started to rise. I knew I needed to get out of there. I turned around quickly and tried to retrace my steps. But the bushes had grown even thicker, and I stumbled several times. The forest felt like it was closing in on me. My heart raced. I shouted for help, but my voice sounded small and weak in the vast quiet. No response. I tried to keep calm and remember my map. I pulled it out, but the lines and marks were confusing in the dim light. I had no idea which way was north. I kept walking, following the slope of the land downhill, hoping to find a stream or a road. The ground was slippery from moss and wet leaves. My legs burned from the effort, and sweat dripped from my forehead. After what felt like an hour, I finally broke through the thicket into a wider area. The trees were thinner here, and I saw a small creek running through the forest. Relief washed over me. Water meant a path, or at least a chance to follow it downstream. I followed the creek, stepping carefully on wet rocks and mud. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows and turning the sky orange and pink. I knew I didn't have much time before it got dark. As I walked, I kept looking over my shoulder, but the strange figure hadn't returned. The sounds of the forest were back. Birds, the rustling of leaves, the buzz of insects. It was normal again. Eventually, I heard a faint hum. Cars, maybe. I pushed harder, moving faster along the creek until I saw a dirt road through the trees. My legs almost gave out from relief. I followed the road, waving my arms to signal if anyone was around. A truck came down the road not long after. The driver stopped and helped me get back to town. I was exhausted, shaking, but safe. The experience stayed with me. I never found out what that figure was or what made that scraping sound in the forest. There was no ghost or monster, just something real and unknown. It reminded me how quickly nature can turn from peaceful to threatening, and how lost you can get when you stray from the path. I learned to always prepare better, to stick to marked trails, and never to underestimate the wilderness. That day changed the way I looked at the forest. It was no longer just a place to hike and relax. It was a place with its own rules, its own dangers, and mysteries I was not meant to solve. And sometimes the scariest thing is not what you see, but what you don't. I set out early that morning, the sky a clear blue, with the kind of cool crispness in the air that promised a perfect day for hiking. The trail I chose was one I had passed over before but never fully explored. It was a narrow path winding through thick forest, part of a larger national park not too far from the city. I had packed light, a small backpack with water, some snacks, a first aid kit, and a map. My phone had a weak signal on this trail, so I wasn't fully relying on it. I liked the feeling of being disconnected, away from the buzz of everyday life. The forest was quiet except for the rustle of leaves underfoot and the occasional bird call. The trees towered around me, thick trunks with rough bark, their branches forming a patchy roof above that filtered sunlight in scattered beams. The smell was earthy, a mix of pine, damp soil, and decaying leaves. I kept a steady pace, careful to watch where I stepped. The ground was uneven, roots and rocks threatening to trip me if I wasn't careful. After an hour or so, I came to a small clearing with a shallow creek cutting through it. The water was clear and cold, trickling over smooth stones. I crouched down and drank a little, wiping my mouth on my sleeve. The sound of the creek was calming. I decided to take a short break and sat on a moss-covered rock near the water. My legs ached slightly from the uneven trail, but it felt good, the kind of tired that comes from being outdoors. I pulled out my water bottle and took a long drink, scanning the path ahead. The trail continued on the other side of the creek, leading into denser forest. I packed up and crossed the creek carefully, stepping on the stones to avoid getting my boots wet. The forest grew darker as I moved deeper in. The trees were closer together, their branches interwoven like a thick canopy blocking the sun. The air was cooler here, and the ground softer with moss and fallen leaves. I noticed the trail markers were becoming less frequent, faded and covered with dirt and moss. The map showed I was still on track, but something felt off. The trail seemed less maintained. I kept going, reminding myself that part of the adventure was to go where fewer people did. After another hour, I reached a steep incline. The path zigzagged up the side of a hill, covered in loose gravel and stones. I took my time climbing, using my trekking poles for balance. The higher I climbed, the better the view became. Peeking through gaps in the trees, I could see the rolling hills stretching out in the distance, the blue of the sky meeting the green of the forest. It was peaceful, almost untouched. As I reached the top, I realized the trail ended abruptly at a large fallen tree blocking the path. It was old, covered in moss and vines, too thick to easily climb over or around. I looked at the map and realized the marked trail continued beyond this point, but the path was completely obscured. I scanned the forest for another way but saw no obvious detour. The sun was starting to drop behind the hills now, turning the sky a soft orange. I figured I had enough time to try and find my way around the fallen tree before dark. I carefully moved into the forest to the right, stepping over roots and pushing aside branches. The underbrush was thick here, and the ground uneven and slippery. After a few minutes, I realized I was no longer following a trail but just trying to find a path that would lead back to the marked route. The forest grew quieter. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. I felt a strange stillness that put me on edge. The shadows lengthened, and I noticed the temperature dropping faster than I expected. My heart started to beat a little faster. I tried to keep calm, telling myself I just needed to find the trail and head back before it got dark. But the more I moved forward, the more lost I became. The trees all looked the same, thick trunks and dark green needles, and there were no clear signs of a path. My map was folded and tucked away in my jacket, but I pulled it out to check again. I could see I had strayed far from the main trail. Panic started to rise as I realized I might be trapped in this dense forest with no way out before nightfall. I tried calling on my phone, but there was no signal. The sun was almost gone now, and the forest turned from soft orange to deep blue and gray. The shadows were long and moving with the slight breeze, but the forest felt heavy, as if time itself slowed down. My breaths came faster, and I forced myself to slow down to think clearly. I looked for a high point, climbing a small mound of earth and fallen branches to try and see if I could spot any lights or clearings beyond the trees. All I saw was a wall of dark green and black. The forest was endless. I knew I had to find shelter and stay put until morning rather than wander aimlessly in the dark. I found a spot near a large tree with thick roots sticking out of the ground and settled down. I pulled out my emergency blanket from my pack, wrapped myself in it, and sat still. The night noises started, distant animal calls, rustling in the bushes, the soft whistle of wind through the leaves. I kept my eyes wide open, trying to stay alert. Hours passed. I stayed awake, listening. At some point, I felt cold settling deep in my bones, but I managed to stay calm. When the sky finally started to brighten again, the first rays of sun breaking through the canopy, I felt relief wash over me. I packed up quickly and tried to retrace my steps, following the faint marks on trees I had seen before. The forest looked different in daylight, and the sounds were no longer threatening but alive and natural. After an hour of careful walking, I finally spotted the main trail. It was obvious now, clear dirt path with bright markers. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I started walking faster, my legs moving with new energy fueled by relief. When I reached the park exit and the parking lot, I felt exhausted but safe. Looking back at the forest edge, I realized how easily things could have gone wrong. No ghosts, no monsters, just a dense forest, rough terrain, and bad timing. Nature is powerful and it commands respect. I learned to never underestimate it, always to prepare better, and most importantly, to stick to the trails and be cautious. That day was a harsh reminder that sometimes the scariest moments come not from the unknown, but from being lost in a place we thought we knew well enough. I planned the hike to clear my head, not to feel hunted by the end of it. I picked a random trail on the map, one I had never heard of before, a thin line that cut through a long stretch of forest and climbed up into a ridge that almost no one talked about. It looked quiet, away from crowds, and that was exactly what I wanted. I packed light, but enough for problems. I left early in the morning when the sky still had that soft blue color that made everything feel calm. The first few hours were normal. The air felt cold and clean, and the forest was thick with tall pine trees that blocked most of the sun. I walked slowly, letting the sound of my footsteps on the dirt steady my thoughts. The deeper I went, the more the trail narrowed until it looked more like something animals used than humans. I kept walking anyway because the stillness felt good at first. There was no wind, no voices, no distant sounds of cars. Just the crunch of my boots and the smell of damp soil. But after a while, that stillness stopped feeling peaceful. It became too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you feel like something has paused the whole world except you. Even the birds were gone. I noticed that around noon when I stopped to drink water. I realized I had not heard a single bird call since morning. I tried convincing myself it was normal, but something about the silence made the hairs on my arms rise. It felt as if something was paying attention to me, even though I could not see anything. I pushed on anyway because turning back so early felt stupid. I told myself it was only in my head, that maybe this area just didn't have many animals. But as I climbed higher, I started noticing small things that made me feel less alone on that trail. A fresh boot print in the mud, but only one, like someone had stepped there and then vanished. A crushed energy bar wrapper caught under a root, not old and faded but clean, as if someone had dropped it that same morning. A deep mark on a tree trunk, not from an animal, but like someone had dragged something sharp across the bark. The sight of it made my stomach feel tight. The trail steepened and forced me to move slower. I kept checking behind me even though nothing was there. Every time I stopped, I felt as if something stopped with me. When I walked, the forest felt like it walked too. I didn't hear footsteps, but I sensed weight moving somewhere out of sight. Maybe that sounds strange, but it felt like pressure in the air shifting whenever I moved. By mid-afternoon, the light started changing. Clouds pushed in fast from the west, heavy and dark. The sky looked like it wanted to swallow the ridge. I still had a long way before reaching the top, and the idea of climbing down the trail in a storm made me uneasy. At the same time, I didn't like the idea of going back down while feeling watched, so I kept going up. The trees grew thinner, but the silence stayed thick like a blanket pressed over my ears. Around one bend in the trail, I found something that made me freeze. A backpack sitting right in the middle of the path. Not torn, not damaged, just placed there like someone set it down and walked away. The straps were muddy, but the rest of it looked almost new. I looked around, trying to see if anyone was near, but the forest stayed empty and still. I didn't touch the bag. I didn't want to stand there too long either, so I walked around it and kept moving. But the feeling of being watched got stronger after that, as if something had noticed that I was now aware something was wrong. The trail turned into loose rock as I reached the ridge. The wind finally picked up, cold and sharp, and I felt some relief because at least it made noise. The view opened up to a wide stretch of forest far below, miles and miles of trees in every direction. The ridge trail continued along the side of the mountain and disappeared around a sharp corner. I followed it, but my legs felt shaky, not from the climb, but from the strange tension that kept growing inside me. Just before the corner, I heard something for the first time all day. Not an animal, not branches breaking. It was metal clicking against metal. A slow, steady sound like someone was tightening something. I stopped breathing for a second, trying to figure out where it came from. It echoed against the ridge wall, making it hard to tell direction. But it felt close, too close. My hands started sweating even though the air was cold. I backed up a little and stood still, waiting to hear it again. The clicking stopped, and the silence dropped back over the ridge like a heavy weight. I felt a sudden strong urge to get away from that place as fast as possible. I didn't know who was there, what they had, or what they were doing, but the sound didn't feel like something harmless. It felt deliberate, like someone checking equipment. I turned around and started walking back toward the forest, not running but moving fast. Every part of my body felt tight, like something inside me wanted to scream but couldn't. As soon as I re-entered the tree line, I felt the quiet again, but this time it felt worse. The air felt thicker, heavier. I kept seeing flashes of movement in my peripheral vision, branches shifting when there was no wind, patches of darker shadow in places that should have been empty. I sped up until my legs burned. The trail looked different going down, almost like it had changed shape. I kept catching myself drifting off the path because my eyes kept checking the forest instead of the ground. I slipped twice, scraping my hands on rocks, but I didn't stop. I just wanted to reach the lower part where the trees grew less dense. At one point, I saw something that made me move even faster. Another boot print in the mud, this time facing the direction I was walking, like someone had been ahead of me but not long ago. The mud around it was still wet and shiny. It was larger than mine, heavier too. I didn't want to stand there imagining how close that person could be, so I kept moving. The sky grew darker, but I didn't care about the weather anymore. I just focused on getting out of that forest. The quiet followed me all the way down, like it clung to my clothes. When I finally reached the lower section of the trail where the trees thinned and I could see longer distances, I finally felt like I could breathe again. My legs were shaking, and my hands had dirt and dried blood from the falls, but I kept pushing forward. When I reached my car at the trailhead, I didn't waste a second. I locked the doors, started the engine, and drove without looking back. Only when I reached the main road did I slow down. My heartbeat still felt sharp in my chest. In the days after, I kept thinking about that backpack, the single boot prints, the metal clicking, the silence that felt alive. I don't know who was up there or what they wanted, but everything I saw pointed to something simple and real. Someone else was on that ridge with me, someone who didn't want to be seen, someone who moved quietly on purpose, someone who watched. The trail was random. I picked it without thinking. Maybe that was the problem. Sometimes the places no one talks about are quiet for a reason. Sometimes the danger isn't a monster or a ghost. It's just another person who knows the forest better than you do. Someone who waits where no one will ever hear what happens. I haven't gone hiking alone since that day, and I don't think I ever will again. The sun was just starting to rise when I parked my car at the edge of the trailhead. The air was crisp, sharp, and smelled of damp earth and pine needles. I had planned this hike for weeks. A solo trip into a stretch of wilderness that was known for its steep cliffs, dense forest, and long, winding trails. I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary, just some good exercise and a few hours away from the noise of the city. What I got was something that stayed with me long after I made it back. The first few miles were easy. The trail was well marked, covered in dry leaves, and flanked by towering trees. The birds were quiet, and the forest felt peaceful. I moved at a steady pace, my boots crunching on the gravel path. I carried a full pack, water, snacks, a first aid kit, and a map. I didn't have cell service, but I figured that was normal this far out. About 2 hours in, the trail began to narrow. The trees grew thicker, and the canopy above blocked most of the sunlight. The air got cooler and heavier. I noticed the usual forest sounds. Birds, insects, started to fade. It was as if the woods themselves had gone silent. I wasn't worried at first. I thought maybe I just entered a denser part of the forest. But then I spotted something that made my skin crawl. On the side of the trail, just a few feet off the path, there was a set of footprints in the dirt. They were large, almost human in shape, but the toes were too long and thin, and the stride was too wide. They weren't fresh, but they were clear enough to make me pause. I scanned the surrounding trees, trying to spot what might have made them. Nothing moved. No rustling leaves. No shadows shifting between the trunks. I told myself it was probably an animal, maybe a deer or a bear with some weird footprint shape. I kept going, but my pace slowed. About half an hour later, I reached a fork in the trail. My map showed both paths eventually connected, but one route was shorter and steeper, the other longer and flatter. I chose the steeper one, wanting to get to the summit before noon. The climb was tougher than I expected. The path was rocky and slippery in places. I had to grab roots and stones to steady myself. As I pushed higher, the forest thinned out, and patches of blue sky peeked through the branches. The temperature dropped noticeably, and the wind picked up. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. Something standing just beyond the edge of the trail, partially hidden behind a tree. It was tall and thin, its shape blending perfectly with the trunks and shadows. At first, I thought it was a tree stump, but the way it moved, slowly shifting side to side, made me freeze. I stood perfectly still, heart pounding in my chest, eyes fixed on the figure. It didn't rush or run, just watched me with a stillness that felt wrong. My mind screamed at me to turn and run, but I forced myself to stay calm. After what felt like minutes but was probably only seconds, it disappeared behind the trees. I wanted to convince myself it was a trick of the light or my imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I scanned the area, looking for any signs of movement, but everything was silent again, too silent. I decided to keep going. The summit was only a few hundred feet higher, and I needed to get there before I lost my nerve. The last part of the climb was exposed, with only low shrubs and jagged rocks. I struggled up the final stretch, muscles burning and breath ragged. When I reached the top, the view was stunning. Rolling hills stretched out for miles, covered in forests that faded into the distant horizon. The sky was clear, the sun warm on my skin. I sat on a large rock and took a long drink of water, trying to steady my shaking hands. As I rested, I noticed something odd near the edge of the summit. A small pile of branches and leaves arranged neatly, like a crude shelter or marker. It looked recent, and next to it was a small, rusted knife stuck into a rock. I didn't touch anything. Instead, I scanned the area, looking for signs of other hikers or campers. There were none. No footprints, no trash, nothing except the pile and the knife. Unease settled in my stomach. Whatever had been watching me down the trail, whoever had built that pile, they were nearby. I stood up quickly, feeling exposed and vulnerable. I started back down the trail, but the silence was now oppressive. Every snap of a twig, every crunch of a leaf under my boots echoed too loudly. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see the figure again. Halfway down, I slipped on a wet rock and fell hard. Pain shot through my ankle. I scrambled to sit up, trying to stay calm. The ankle was swollen and throbbing, but I could still put some weight on it. I knew I had to get back to the car before dark, or this would get much worse. I limped along, slower now, every step a reminder of how exposed I was. The shadows grew longer, the light fading quickly. The silence around me deepened until it felt like the forest was holding its breath. Then, I heard it, a low rustling, like someone moving carefully through the underbrush just off the trail. My heart slammed in my chest. I stopped, frozen, straining to hear more. The sound stopped too. I forced myself to keep moving, trying not to look around. The trail twisted and turned, and the forest seemed to close in tighter. My legs screamed in protest, but I pushed through the pain, desperate to reach my car. After what felt like hours, I finally saw the clearing where I'd parked. Relief washed over me, but it was tempered by exhaustion and fear. I reached the car, fumbling for my keys with shaking hands. As I got in, I glanced back toward the forest edge. For a brief moment, I thought I saw the tall, thin figure standing just beyond the trees, watching me leave. I locked the doors and started the engine, not stopping until the trailhead was far behind me. Later, at home, I called the local ranger station. I described what I'd seen, the footprints, the figure, the pile of branches, and the knife. They told me they'd had reports of a man living off the grid in that area, someone who avoided contact with people and was known to be territorial. They warned hikers to be cautious. I realized then what I had faced wasn't some supernatural force or a ghost. It was a real person, someone willing to watch, maybe even follow, anyone who came near his territory. The silence, the watching, the fear, it was all very real and very dangerous. That hike taught me that the wilderness isn't just about nature. Sometimes the scariest things out there are other people living unseen who don't want to be found. And when you're alone, injured, and vulnerable in the middle of nowhere, there's no one to help but yourself. I've never gone back to that trail, and I don't plan to. I did not plan to hike alone that week, but everything in my life had started to feel heavy and loud, and the mountains were the only place where things made sense. I picked a long trail that started deep in a valley and wound through miles of forest before climbing toward a narrow ridge. It was the kind of trail people used only in the colder months because the air got dry and the nights dropped fast. But that day I felt something inside me pushing to go. I packed light, only what I needed, and drove out early enough that the sky still had that pale color before sunrise. I remember stepping out of the car and feeling how the cold bit my fingers. Not in a painful way, but sharp enough to remind me that I would be far from anyone for hours. The first part of the hike felt peaceful. The trees on both sides leaned toward the trail, and the ground was soft with old leaves and dirt. I liked how the forest muted every small sound. Even the birds sounded distant. The trail had no one on it, not even at the entrance, which was strange because I always expected at least one other person to appear. I kept walking, breathing slow, and letting the weight of my pack settle on my shoulders. My boots sank a little into the ground each step, and I felt the rhythm calm me. After about an hour, the land changed. The trees grew thinner, and the path grew more narrow and uneven. There were long stretches where fallen branches forced me to step off the trail, and each time I felt as if the forest was closing a bit more behind me, like the way snow closes a footprint. The air started to smell damp, even though there had been no rain for days. I noticed it every time I inhaled, that earthy moisture that did not match the dry season at all. The silence also grew deeper. Even the wind dropped away, and the only sound left was the steady crunch of gravel under my feet. As I moved farther in, I started seeing strange signs of someone else being there before me. A piece of torn fabric stuck to a branch. A small crushed plastic bottle half buried in the dirt. Footprints that did not match the shape of mine. They looked like they were made by someone who dragged their feet instead of stepping normally, as if tired or in a hurry. At first, I told myself that maybe some hiker had come through recently, but the trail was so empty and forgotten that it felt unlikely. The prints also zigzagged in a way that made no sense, going off the trail, then returning, then veering again. I kept walking, but I felt the hairs rise along my arms, even under my jacket. The deeper I walked, the stranger I felt. The forest seemed to grow darker, even though the day should have been bright by then. The sun was somewhere above, but the trees blocked it more than before. I kept checking the time on my watch, and somehow the hours felt stretched. I would walk what felt like a long distance, then check and see that barely 10 minutes had passed. The silence grew so thick that even my own breathing sounded too loud, like it was bouncing back at me from the trees. Around midday, I reached a section where the trail sloped upward. It was the steepest part before the ridge. The dirt was loose, and every time I stepped, dust slid down behind me. That was when I saw the first thing that made genuine fear crawl into my stomach. On the ground, right in the center of the path, lay a small metal camping cup. It was dented and covered in dirt, but what scared me was that it still had moisture inside, like someone had used it recently. The dirt stuck to the rim felt almost fresh. I did not touch it. I only stared at it, and then at the trail ahead, trying to understand how someone could be so close without me hearing a single sound. I pushed on, feeling my heartbeat grow faster. Every small crack of a twig made me freeze. I kept scanning the trees, expecting to see someone step out, but nothing moved. I reached the top of the slope and found the forest even more dense. The branches looked dead but refused to fall, hanging heavy over the narrow path. The dimness made it hard to see far ahead. The footprints returned again, deeper now, like the person had been running. They led farther up the trail, and something inside me told me that following them was a bad idea. But there was no other way out unless I turned around entirely, and turning around felt like inviting something to follow me. I kept hiking, one step after another, while every instinct in my body told me something was wrong. The footprints soon became messy, like the person had stumbled or fallen. More torn fabric appeared on bark. A broken strap from a bag lay half hidden in mud. I felt the air turning colder, not the natural cold from weather, but a sudden drop that made my hands numb even through the gloves. I stopped and listened, holding my breath. That was when I heard the first real sound that did not belong to me. It was faint and far behind me, like quick, uneven steps on loose dirt. They stopped the moment I moved my head. I forced myself to keep going. I controlled my breathing and tried not to think about what might be behind me. The trail finally led to a narrow clearing, a small flat space surrounded by clustered trees. In the middle of it, the footprints ended. They simply stopped, like the person had stood there for a long time. The dirt was disturbed, too. Something heavy had moved around in circles. The ground looked pressed down by weight and restless motion. No signs of where the person went next. No prints leaving the area. Just the messy, confusing pattern of someone pacing, stumbling, maybe even crawling. I felt sweat run cold down my back even though the air was freezing. The forest felt like it was holding its breath. I turned slowly, scanning every tree trunk, every shadow, every patch of dirt. There was no sign of anyone, but the feeling of being watched wrapped around me so tight I could barely swallow. I decided then I had to leave the trail completely and cut down the side of the ridge. It would be harder, but at least it would get me away from whatever had happened there. I pushed through the trees, breaking branches and sliding down wet leaves. Every few seconds, I thought I heard something following me, matching my movements with a small delay. Not running, not rushing, just following. I never saw anything, but the pressure of it kept me moving faster. My legs shook from the uneven ground, and more than once I nearly fell, catching myself on roots and rocks. My pack felt heavier than it ever had, pulling me backward as I slid. I reached a rocky drop that led toward the lower part of the forest. It was steep, but I knew I could climb down if I went slowly. Behind me, I heard something shift, a single heavy step crushing leaves. I did not look. I climbed down, scraping my hands on the rocks, letting dirt coat my palms. Halfway down, small stones rolled past me, bouncing fast. Something had knocked them loose from above. I didn't stop. I kept going until my boots hit flatter ground and I could run. I ran without stopping, crashing through brush and under branches, until the trees finally began to thin and the light returned. When I reached the lower trail that looped toward the parking area, my legs nearly collapsed from relief. The air tasted clean again. The silence loosened. I did not slow down until I reached my car. Only then did I dare turn around and look back at the trail. Nothing moved. Nothing followed. The forest looked still and harmless, like it had been the whole time. I drove away fast and did not look in the mirrors more than I had to. That night, I lay in bed and tried to make sense of what happened. But the only thing I knew for sure was that someone had been out there. Someone had been ahead of me, leaving those signs, struggling on that trail. And someone or something human, something real, had been behind me too. The next week, I checked every news site and local report to see if anyone had gone missing near that area. Nothing appeared. No missing hiker. No rescue operation. No abandoned gear found. It was like I had walked through the remains of something that no one wanted to talk about. Even now, when I think about that day, the part that scares me most is not the footprints or the sudden cold or the sounds behind me. It's the clearing. The way the footprints simply ended. The thought that maybe the person did not leave because they never got the chance to leave. And the heavy steps that followed me after I entered that space. I never went back to that trail again. I still hike, but never alone and never anywhere near that ridge. Some people say the forest is peaceful, but I know now that silence can hide things. Real things. Things that breathe the same air and move on the same dirt. And sometimes, when I am on a new trail and the trees go quiet, I feel that same pressure on the back of my neck, like something patient and steady is waiting just far enough behind me that I cannot see it. I keep walking every time. I keep breathing slow, but I never forget what happened on that ridge, and I never ignore the feeling that I left something behind, or maybe something followed me out, keeping its distance, waiting for another quiet place where the sound of footsteps cannot be explained. I planned the hike because I felt like I had been stuck in the same routine for too long. I wanted fresh air, quiet places, long trails, and the feeling of being far away from people. I picked a random mountain trail I found online, far from towns and far from busy roads. It looked peaceful in the photos. Dense woods, narrow paths, and long stretches of silence. It seemed perfect for clearing my head. I packed light but enough to stay safe. A small tent, a sleeping bag, some food, extra water, a knife, a map, my phone, and my flashlight. I wanted to move slow and explore everything, and the trail seemed like a good place to do that. When I arrived, the air felt still. There were no other cars at the trailhead, which I actually liked. I started walking at a steady pace, feeling the ground change under my boots as the forest got thicker. At first, the hike felt normal. Birds moved between branches. Dry leaves snapped under my feet. The air smelled like wet soil. The trail wound between tall trees that blocked most of the sky. The deeper I went, the more cut off from everything I felt. But it felt good. It felt like I could finally hear myself think again. After about an hour of hiking, I noticed something strange about the trail. It didn't look exactly like the photos I saw online, but I assumed the pictures were old. I kept going until the path thinned out so much that I almost missed a turn. The deeper I moved, the quieter everything became. Even the birds seemed to disappear. I could hear my own breathing, the slight rub of my backpack straps against my shoulders, and the small crunch of gravel mixed with dirt under my shoes. The stillness of the woods felt heavy, but I kept pushing forward. I reached a small clearing around midday. I dropped my backpack, stretched my shoulders, and drank some water. While I rested, I noticed something odd on the far side of the clearing. A single footprint in the soft soil. Not fresh, but not old either. The shape was deep, like someone had carried something heavy or stepped hard. I didn't think too much about it. Trails always have random footprints. I kept hiking. The deeper I went, the narrower the trail became, until it barely felt like a trail at all. Fallen branches forced me to step around them. The trees grew closer together, with their trunks leaning in slightly, making the space feel tight. I tried using the map, but it didn't show this part very clearly. The more I looked, the more I felt like maybe the trail I picked wasn't the main one people usually used. I thought about turning back, but the trail behind me looked just as overgrown as the one ahead, and the idea of retracing such a long stretch made me feel tired already. About 3 hours into the hike, I spotted something hanging from a tree branch ahead. It was a strip of torn fabric, caught on a broken twig, fluttering gently in the breeze. It was dark gray and rough, maybe from a jacket or a backpack. I walked up to it and looked around the area. The bushes nearby were bent, like someone had passed through them recently. The ground was disturbed as well, with heavy prints leading deeper into the woods but not following the official trail. They curved slightly left into thick brush. I told myself that maybe someone had gotten lost or taken a shortcut, but something about the shape of the prints bothered me. They looked too wide, too heavy, like whoever made them wasn't walking casually. More like someone walking with purpose, or running. I left the fabric where it was and kept following the marked trail because I didn't want to wander into unknown parts of the forest. But the feeling in my stomach changed. The peacefulness I wanted earlier was gone. I kept glancing behind me even though I didn't hear anything. My steps felt too loud. My breathing felt too fast. When I finally reached a spot wide enough for me to set up my tent, the sun was already dipping behind the tree line. I didn't want to camp there, but I didn't have a choice. I felt hungry and tired. I pitched my tent fast, ate a small meal, and waited for the darkness to settle. As night came, the air turned cold. The forest went completely silent again, even more silent than earlier. The kind of silence that made every little movement inside my tent sound much bigger than it really was. For a long time, nothing happened. I lay inside my sleeping bag, staring at the faint outline of the tent walls. My thoughts drifted between wanting to sleep and wanting to stay awake in case something was out there. Then I heard something. A short, sharp sound, like a foot pressing down on a dry stick, came from the left side of the tent. I froze and held my breath, hoping it was an animal. A minute passed, then another sound, this time behind the tent. Slow movement, heavy steps, not fast, not frantic. Slow, careful steps, like someone placing their feet down with caution. I kept perfectly still. The sounds moved around the back of the tent, then stopped near the front, close enough that I could feel a faint vibration in the ground. I waited, barely breathing. Nothing moved. The air outside felt like it was holding its breath along with me. After several long minutes, the steps moved away. They faded slowly, heading downhill. I stayed awake for hours after that, afraid to even unzip the tent and check. My mind kept replaying the weight of those steps. They didn't sound like a deer or any forest animal I had heard before. They sounded like a person trying not to be heard. When I finally slept, it was short and shallow. As soon as the first light appeared, I packed everything as fast as I could. I didn't bother eating. My hands shook while I rolled up my sleeping bag. I kept imagining something standing just behind the trees, watching. The cold morning air felt sharp in my chest, but I forced myself to start moving. I walked fast, trying to remember the path exactly, but everything looked different in daylight. The trees looked more twisted. The ground looked uneven, covered with patches of dry leaves and hidden holes. I walked for maybe an hour before I saw something that made my stomach twist. Fresh footprints. Not the old ones from yesterday. These were new, deep, close together. They were pointed in the same direction I was going, like whoever made them had walked down this path earlier that morning. The soil around them still looked soft. I moved slower after that, checking the woods every few seconds. My head kept turning. I felt watched even though I never saw anyone. Every shadow between trees looked like a shape. Every rustle of leaves made my chest tighten. I continued walking and found another piece of torn fabric caught on a branch. It was the same color as the first one. Same rough texture. Same ripped edge. I didn't want to think about what it meant, but I knew. Someone was ahead of me. Someone who walked the same path I needed to take to get out. The footprints eventually left the main trail and went down a small slope into a thick patch of bushes. I stayed on the trail, but the whole time I kept expecting something to appear behind me or step out in front of me. Sweat rolled down my back even though the air was cold. The rest of the hike felt endless. Every minute stretched, each step feeling heavier. My legs shook from fear more than exhaustion. I started counting my steps, trying to focus on something other than the idea of someone moving through the woods with me. Someone who had circled my tent in the night. When I finally reached the trailhead, my car looked unreal, like something from another life. My hands were trembling as I unlocked the door. I threw my backpack inside, climbed in, and locked the doors before even starting the engine. When I did start it, I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see someone stepping out of the trees. I drove until the forest was far behind me. Only then did I feel like I could breathe normally again. Even now, I still think about the footsteps around my tent. The torn fabric, the heavy prints, the way the person moved slowly, like they were studying the tent, maybe waiting for me to come out. I still wonder if they were looking for something, or someone, or if they were just out there, wandering, watching anyone unlucky enough to cross their path. What stays with me the most is this simple thought. I never saw them, but they saw me. They walked around my tent. They walked the same trail as me. They left signs everywhere without saying a word. And the scariest part is knowing they were close enough to touch the tent if they wanted to. Close enough to reach me in the dark without me being able to do anything. I haven't gone hiking alone since that day, and I don't think I ever will again. I started the hike early in the morning, before the sun had fully pushed the cold darkness out of the valley. I picked a random trail on the map the night before, a long route that cut through a stretch of forest I had never explored. I wanted a quiet day alone, something to clear my head. The air felt sharp when I walked out of the parking area, and the trees stood still like they were holding their breath. I felt good, awake, and ready for a long climb. The first hour passed slowly as the path grew steeper. My legs warmed up, and my breathing fell into a steady rhythm. The trail cut along the side of a slope, with thick trees on both sides. As the light grew stronger, I could see the texture of the ground better. Wet leaves, patches of mud, thin roots crossing the path, and small stones that rolled under my shoes. It felt normal, peaceful in a simple way, like I had done this 100 times. But somewhere around the second hour, the forest changed. The air still felt cool, but there was a kind of heaviness in it now, like the whole place was waiting for something. I couldn't see any animals, not even a bird crossing overhead. That silence started to press on my mind. I tried to ignore it and pushed on. The trail became narrower as I climbed. The trees grew closer together, their lower branches twisted in strange shapes. I kept noticing small things that felt off. For example, I found a single hiking pole stuck in the ground beside a large rock. It was standing straight like someone had pushed it deep into the soil. There were no footprints around it, no sign of anyone nearby. I tried not to think about it, but I kept wondering why someone would leave it like that. As I continued, the ground became softer. I stepped on patches of earth that sank slightly under my weight. It felt like the forest floor had been disturbed recently. A few minutes later, I found an area where the soil was turned up like something had been dragged through it. The marks ran across the trail and disappeared into the thick trees on the other side. I couldn't tell what had caused them. They didn't look like animal tracks. They were long, smooth lines, inconsistent, like something heavy had been pulled over the dirt. I felt a cold pressure in my chest as I stared at them. I kept going because turning back felt worse somehow. I didn't want to admit that the random trail I picked might have been a mistake. The deeper I went, the stranger everything became. I found small piles of stones in different places, stacked too neatly to be natural. Some were sitting right in the middle of the trail. They weren't tall, but they were placed with care, like someone had arranged them for a reason. They didn't feel like markers either. They felt like warnings, but I didn't know what they were warning me about. The forest got darker even though the sun was probably high by then. The trail dipped into a stretch where the trees grew so tall and so close that almost no light made it through. I felt uneasy walking through it. My footsteps sounded too loud. Every time a leaf moved behind me, I felt my skin crawl. I kept glancing back even though I knew I wouldn't see anything. My mind told me it was just the wind, but there was barely any wind that day. I climbed a long hill that felt much steeper than it looked on the map. When I reached the top, I saw something that made my stomach tighten. There was a backpack lying on its side near the roots of a tree. It looked worn and dirty, as if it had been there for days. The zipper was half open. I didn't touch it. I didn't want to. Something about it felt wrong, like touching it would pull me into something I didn't want to know. I walked around it and kept moving. My heartbeat was faster now, and I could feel sweat building under my shirt even though the air was cool. I tried to convince myself that people leave things behind all the time. Maybe someone dropped it. Maybe they planned to come back for it. But the doubt in my mind grew heavier with every step. Not long after, I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, almost unnoticeable, like something old and rotten far away. But the deeper I went, the stronger it became. It wasn't the smell of a dead animal. It was sharper, more sour, like something decaying in the cold. Felt unnatural for the forest. I tried breathing through my mouth, but the odor worked its way in anyway. The trail started to descend suddenly, cutting down between thick rocks and fallen trees. The smell was strongest here. I stopped once, bending forward slightly, trying to breathe slowly so I wouldn't panic. I could feel a deep instinct inside me, the kind that rises when something is wrong even if you can't see it. Then I heard it, soft, quick footsteps somewhere behind me. They weren't heavy like a large animal. They were light, irregular, like someone stepping carefully but not carefully enough. I didn't turn around right away. I just stood still, staring at the ground, feeling my pulse in my ears. When I finally looked back, there was nothing on the trail, just trees and dark spaces between them. But the feeling didn't leave. I knew something had moved. I started walking faster. My legs burned, but I didn't slow down. Every few minutes, I heard faint sounds behind me. Twigs snapping, leaves shifting, something brushing against a tree trunk. I never saw anything when I looked. That made it worse. Whatever it was, it knew how to stay out of sight. The trail twisted left, then right, then dropped sharply again. I realized I had no idea how far I'd gone. I checked my phone, but there was no signal and the battery had dropped faster than it normally did. I stuffed it back in my pocket and kept moving. At some point, I noticed the footprints. They weren't mine. They were on parts of the path I hadn't walked yet. They were spaced unevenly, like whoever made them was limping or unsteady. Some looked fresh. The edges were crisp. The soil around them was still slightly wet. I felt a deep chill crawl up my spine. I kept going until the trail leveled out. Then I heard the footsteps again, this time closer. They were fast, as if whatever had been moving behind me had decided to close the distance. I didn't look back. Couldn't. All I could do was walk faster, almost jogging now. My breath shook in my chest, but I forced myself forward. The trail finally widened and I saw the faint shape of a trail marker nailed to a tree ahead. It meant I was close to the loop that would lead back toward the start. I pushed harder, ignoring the burning in my legs. The footsteps behind me grew softer, then faded completely as I neared the exposed part of the trail. When the trees finally thinned and the light grew brighter, I felt a wave of relief sink through me. The open space felt safe. The silence here sounded normal again. I didn't stop walking until I reached the parking area, and even then I didn't look back toward the forest. I unlocked my car with shaking hands and sat inside for a long moment, trying to calm my breathing. By the time I drove away, the forest looked peaceful in the rearview mirror, as if nothing had happened inside it. But I knew what I felt. Something had followed me in those woods. Something real. Something alive. Not a ghost, not a story. Just something that existed out there, hidden, silent, and watching. And the trail I had picked at random never felt random again after that day. I never returned to that part of the forest. I never took a trail without studying it closely again. And every time I hike now, I listen more carefully to the silence, because I learned that day how quickly peace can turn into fear, and how something you never see can come closer than you ever realize until it's almost too late. I started hiking early in the morning, long before the sun pushed over the hills. I wanted to pick a random trail, something far from busy spots, something quiet where I could hear myself think. I parked my car at a small pull-off on a mountain road and stepped onto a path that I had never seen before. The sign was old and cracked, with the paint peeling so badly that I couldn't read the name of the trail. Something about that made it feel even more interesting to me. I liked the idea of walking somewhere that didn't get many visitors. The air felt cold enough to sting my nose, and the ground was still holding the night's dampness. My boots made a soft crushing sound on the gravel and leaves. I kept walking deeper, watching how the trees grew thicker the farther I went. The trail twisted a lot, climbing slowly upward, and I could feel the effort in my legs, but I didn't mind. The quiet around me felt peaceful at first. The only sounds were my breathing and the occasional crack of a branch under my feet. As the sun finally rose, the forest lit up enough for me to see how uneven the place really was. Fallen logs were scattered everywhere, and there were patches of earth torn up like something heavy had dragged across it not too long ago. I stopped a few times to look at these spots, thinking maybe people brought gear through here or maybe animals had been fighting. I didn't think much about it in the beginning, but every time I saw another torn section of ground, I felt a small pull of worry. After about an hour, the air changed. It felt warmer but thicker, almost like the trees were trapping everything inside. I noticed how the forest had grown strangely quiet too. Even the small things, birds, insects, the rustle of leaves, seemed to fade out. I didn't want to turn back yet, but something inside me started to feel tense. The trail narrowed and forced me to walk in a single straight line, pushing between tight groups of trees. The branches reached out across the path, and some of them had deep scratches in them, like something had run through fast and hard. I kept walking anyway. I told myself it was just wildlife. Scratches were normal. Drag marks were normal. Forests were full of things I didn't see. I walked for maybe another 15 minutes before I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, like something old or wet or spoiled, and I tried to ignore it, but the farther I went, the stronger it became. It smelled like a mix of damp metal and rot. I covered my nose with my sleeve and kept moving because the trail didn't give me anywhere to step aside. The smell only got worse. I slowed down, and that was when I saw something ahead. A dark shape lying on the side of the trail, half covered by leaves. It wasn't an animal. It was a torn backpack. One of the straps was ripped clean off. The zipper looked broken too, bent outward like it had been forced open. When I got closer, I saw a water bottle nearby that had deep dents in it, as if something had bitten or crushed it. There was mud smeared across everything, but there were also lines, thin lines that looked too straight to be random, almost like they were scratches left by fingers or claws. My stomach dropped. I felt a tightness crawl up my neck and into my face. I didn't want to stay near that pack. I stepped around it, but the smell grew even heavier. I kept checking the trees, the trail behind me, the ground beside me. I didn't see anything moving, but I felt something wrong in the air, something that made my skin prickle. The trail climbed sharply after that point. My breathing grew loud in my ears because the silence around me was so strong. Felt like even the forest was waiting. I pushed myself to move faster. My legs started to shake a little, not from the climb but from the pressure building inside me. I couldn't see anything chasing me, but every time a leaf moved or a branch bent, my heart jumped so hard that I felt it in my throat. As I reached a higher part of the trail, the smell faded and the air felt thinner again. I stopped for a moment to catch my breath. I told myself I was okay. I told myself nothing was following me, that whatever happened to that pack must have been days old, maybe even weeks. But my body didn't believe that. I could still feel that crawling tension. When I started walking again, I noticed something else. Footprints. They were ahead of me on the trail, but they didn't look normal. They were long, deeper than my own, and spaced too far apart for a person who was just walking. They looked like someone had been running, but the stride was strange, almost uneven. Some prints were sharply pressed into the dirt while others were faded, like the runner had stumbled but kept going. As I followed the trail upward, I saw that the footprints eventually veered off the main path, disappearing down a steep hillside where the brush was thick. I didn't want to follow them. I kept going straight. The more I climbed, the more tired I felt, like the mountain was pulling something out of me. Sweat soaked through my shirt even though the air was cold. I kept looking behind me, feeling more exposed every time I turned around. At one point, I swear I heard something far below, a distant thump, followed by the faint rustle of leaves. My whole body stiffened. I didn't wait to see anything. I just kept climbing faster. After what felt like forever, the trees finally opened into a small clearing. It wasn't a large space, just enough for sunlight to spill directly onto the dirt. I walked into the light and felt a tiny bit safer just being able to see around me. The clearing had a flat rock in the center and what looked like an old fire ring, but the stones had collapsed, and the wood inside was almost dust. It looked like no one had used this spot in years. I sat on the rock for a moment and drank from my bottle. My hands were shaking so much that I kept spilling water on my jeans. I didn't even want to rest, but I needed to slow down before I pushed myself too far. I stayed in that clearing for maybe 5 minutes, and in that short time I kept turning to every sound, even the wind sliding through the grass. When I finally stood up, I made the decision to go back. I didn't want to keep climbing into a place that felt more and more wrong. The mountain felt empty but watched at the same time. I started heading downhill, moving faster than before but trying not to make too much noise. My steps were light and controlled at first, but my nerves were so tight that I kept slipping on loose dirt. The deeper I walked, the more certain I felt that something had been there. Something had moved through this forest fast enough and strong enough to tear the earth, break through gear, and leave those strange footprints. I never saw what it was, and maybe that made it worse. I just kept moving, gripping branches to keep myself steady. It took a long time to reach the place where I had first seen the torn backpack. When I approached that part of the trail again, the smell was still there, but something had changed. The pack was gone. Every piece of it, backpack, water bottle, scraps of fabric, was gone. The leaves where it had been lying were disturbed, like something large had moved through again, dragging everything deeper into the woods. I didn't stop. I didn't look around. I just kept walking as fast as my legs would let me without running. The rest of the trail felt longer than before, almost like the mountain was stretching itself. My chest hurt from breathing so hard, and my shoulders felt tight and sore. I didn't let myself look behind me again until I finally reached the road. When I stepped out of the trees and saw my car waiting there, it felt like I had stepped out of something heavy, like the forest let go of me. I unlocked the door with shaking hands and sat inside without turning on the engine. I stared at the trail entrance for a long moment, watching the trees stand silently, hiding everything behind them. I didn't see movement. I didn't hear anything. The mountain looked harmless again, as if nothing had happened at all. But I know what I saw. I know what I smelled. I know how the ground was torn up, how the pack had been ripped open, how the prints had stretched far too long, and how the forest had felt like it was holding its breath. I drove away slowly, gripping the wheel tighter than I needed to. Even hours later, when I was far from the mountains, I still felt that strange tension in my chest. I kept thinking about how something had moved through those woods, something strong and fast and real, something that didn't care who else walked the trail. I'm not going back to that mountain again. That trail felt empty, but not safe. And since that day, every time I hike, I pay close attention to the ground, the trees, the air, and the silence, because now I understand that sometimes the scariest thing isn't what you see. It's what you hear, smell, and feel long before anything shows itself. That hike taught me that some places look peaceful until you step into the wrong part of them. And once you do, the only thing that matters is getting out before you become one of the things left behind. The day I decided to go hiking alone was one I thought would be just like any other, a simple break from the noise of the city. I packed my bag with the usual essentials: water, snacks, a map, a compass, and a basic first aid kit. The weather was clear and cool, perfect for a long day in the woods. I had picked a trail that was supposed to be moderately difficult, winding through dense forest and rocky terrain, somewhere about 15 miles long. It was the kind of trail that promised a good challenge but nothing too extreme, and I felt confident in my experience to handle it alone. The morning started well. The air was fresh, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the trail beneath my boots was soft from last night's rain. Birds sang in the branches above, and the occasional rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush kept me company. I moved at a steady pace, occasionally stopping to catch my breath or take a sip of water. The path twisted and turned through thick clusters of trees, sometimes opening up to reveal steep slopes or rocky outcrops that gave a wide view of the valley below. I loved those moments when I could see the landscape stretch out for miles, feeling like I was standing on the edge of the world. Around midday, I reached a narrow ridge where the trail split. According to the map, both paths would eventually loop back to the main trail, but one was marked as less traveled. The old map was a little faded in places, so I hesitated for a moment before choosing the less traveled route, thinking it might be quieter and more peaceful. I figured it would add some adventure and maybe a bit more solitude. That's when things started to shift. The path grew narrower and steeper. Tree roots twisted across it, making every step a bit more careful. The forest felt thicker, darker. The canopy closed overhead, and the sunlight filtered through in weak, greenish patches. The air grew cooler, damper. The sounds of birds faded until the forest was almost silent, except for the crunch of my boots on dry leaves and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. The peaceful feeling turned uneasy, but I told myself it was just the wildness of the place. Nothing more. I pressed on, but after about an hour, I realized I hadn't seen a single marker or signpost. The trail seemed less distinct, almost swallowed by the forest. I stopped to check my map again. The edges were even more faded here, the lines almost smudged. I tried to find my location by comparing the map to the terrain, but everything looked the same. Trees, shadows, rocks. The compass needle swung wildly, which made no sense. I put the compass back in my pack and kept going, hoping the trail would become clearer soon. The ground underfoot became uneven and loose, with patches of wet moss making it slippery. I had to hold onto branches and rocks to keep my balance as I climbed a steep incline. My heart rate picked up, but I reminded myself that this was part of the hike. What I didn't expect was the sudden silence that fell completely. No wind, no birds, no insects, just stillness. It was the kind of quiet that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. Then I heard it, a faint sound, like something moving behind me. I stopped and turned around slowly. There was nothing visible through the thick trees, but the sound continued, subtle but steady, like footsteps. I paused, listening, but the noise stopped when I stopped moving. I took a deep breath and told myself it was probably just a deer or some other animal. I moved forward again, but the feeling of being watched stayed with me. After a few more minutes, the path disappeared altogether. The ground opened into a small clearing surrounded by dense bushes and towering pines. The sun barely reached through the thick branches above, casting long shadows over the mossy floor. I looked around, trying to spot any sign of a trail. Nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, no worn-down grass. I was lost. I checked my watch. I had been hiking for about 5 hours, and now the sky was starting to turn a dull gray, signaling the late afternoon. I still had a few sips of water left, but not nearly enough to last until I found my way back. My phone had no signal, no surprise, given how deep into the forest I was. Panic started to creep in. I knew the first rule in situations like this was to stay calm and not wander aimlessly. I sat down on a fallen log to think. The forest was silent again. The earlier sounds hadn't returned. I looked at the map and tried to recall landmarks I had passed, but everything blended into the dense, unchanging forest. I decided to head downhill, reasoning that water usually runs downhill and might lead to a stream or river which I could follow out. Moving carefully, I went down the slope, gripping roots and rocks to steady myself. The underbrush thickened, tearing at my clothes and scratching my arms. Then I stumbled onto a narrow stream. Relief flooded through me. I followed the water slowly, hoping it would lead me to a larger trail or maybe a road. The stream twisted through the forest, and after about an hour of walking alongside it, the sky began to darken. The forest grew colder and damp. My feet were wet, and my clothes damp with sweat and moisture from the underbrush. I tried to keep calm and stay alert, but the creeping feeling of fear was growing. Around me, shadows seemed to stretch longer, the trees looming taller. I noticed broken branches and some strange markings on the trees. Scratches that looked deliberate, but I couldn't tell if they were natural or something else. As night approached, I realized I had no choice but to find a place to rest. The terrain was uneven and cold, but I found a small, dry patch beneath a large fir tree. I unpacked my emergency blanket, wrapped myself as best I could, and tried to settle down. My mind raced with thoughts of how I would get out of this and whether anyone would come looking for me. The night passed slowly, filled with unsettling sounds, distant cracking of branches, rustling in the bushes. Every noise made me tense. At one point, I heard something heavy moving nearby, but when I looked, there was only darkness and shadows. I stayed still, heart pounding. At first light, I started following the stream again, hoping for a sign of human activity. After hours of walking, the forest finally started to thin. I began seeing trash and discarded cans, signs that people had been here. Soon after, I found a faint dirt road. The relief was overwhelming. I followed the road until I saw a car parked beside it and a man walking toward it. I flagged him down, exhausted and shaken. He gave me water and a phone to call for help. He said he'd been hiking himself and knew this area well. According to him, the trail I had taken was rarely used and known for causing people to get lost. The markings I saw, he explained, were probably from people trying to find their way back but ending up scratching trees in frustration or leaving signs to others. I was lucky to make it out. I realized how quickly things could go wrong when you stray from marked paths and overestimate your ability to navigate wild terrain. The woods are beautiful, but they demand respect and caution. That day, I learned that nature doesn't need to be haunted or mysterious to be terrifying. Just being lost, alone, and unsure of your next step is enough to scare anyone. I promised myself never to take a trail without proper preparation or without telling someone exactly where I was going. The experience stayed with me long after, a clear reminder that the forest is not just a place for adventure, but a place that can turn unforgiving in an instant. The key to survival is knowledge, respect, and keeping calm when everything feels like it's closing in on you. I started the hike early in the morning, long before the sun showed any color in the sky. I wanted to cover a long route I had never tried before, something random on the map that caught my eye the night before. It looked simple when I saw it on my phone, just a thin line cutting through a wide stretch of forest and hills. I thought it would be good to clear my head, to walk alone where there was nothing but trees, dirt, and the sound of my own steps. I packed light because I wanted to move fast, just water, some snacks, a small first aid kit, and my phone with enough battery to last the day. I felt completely fine at the start, like I had done this 1,000 times. The first hour felt easy. The trail was a bit narrow but still clear, and the air smelled cold and clean. I liked how the leaves moved when wind passed through them and how the ground felt under my boots, soft but firm. The forest was quiet in a natural way, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like nothing around you cares about where you are or what you're doing. It was peaceful in a way that felt almost heavy. But there was nothing scary at that point, nothing strange. just the usual things you expect outdoors. After some time, the trail started to bend and rise slowly. I noticed that the trees grew closer together the deeper I walked, and the sunlight had trouble touching the ground. The air turned cooler. I kept walking at a steady pace, but after a while, I started to feel like the trail looked a little less like a trail. I brushed it off as normal because some paths get rough after rain or when not many people use them. But the more I moved forward, the more things around me changed in a way that I felt but didn't want to accept. The ground had fewer footprints than any normal hiking route. Some areas looked untouched, like no one had walked there in months. I stopped for a moment to drink water and catch my breath. When I looked ahead, the trail stretched deeper into a thicker part of the forest, darker and quieter than what I had passed already. I reminded myself that I had picked something random, so it made sense that it didn't look perfect. Still, something about that silence pulled at me. It wasn't the peaceful silence from before. This one felt like the forest was holding its breath. I told myself to keep moving because turning back so early would be pointless. Not long after I continued, I started hearing small sounds behind me now and then. Leaves shifting, twigs snapping, dirt shifting lightly, but every time I stopped to listen, the sound stopped too. I didn't like that feeling at all. It made my neck feel tight and cold. I tried to walk faster, hoping it would settle my mind. The air smelled different too, more earthy, like wet soil mixed with something metallic. I thought maybe it was just the deeper parts of the woods, but it didn't feel like a normal smell. After almost 3 hours of walking, I reached a part of the forest where the trees grew in strange angles, as if strong winds had pushed them repeatedly in one direction. Some of them leaned over the trail like they would fall any second. The ground was uneven, poking up with old roots and small stones. I had to watch each step so I wouldn't twist my ankle. My breathing grew heavier, not from the physical work but from the atmosphere around me. It felt wrong, but I didn't want to turn around yet. I told myself if I just pushed a bit more, the trail might open up again. But then I noticed something that made me stop completely. There were footprints in the dirt going in the same direction as me. They were not fresh but not old either. They looked deep, like the person who made them carried something heavy. The angles of the prints were off too, like the steps were taken too fast or without balance. I stood still and stared at them for a long moment because I knew they weren't mine. The size wasn't even close. And what made it worse was how they went on for a long distance but then stopped suddenly, like the person had stepped off the trail and disappeared into the thick trees. I didn't want to think about what kind of person would walk out here alone and then leave the trail like that. I scanned that area, trying to see through the trees, but everything was so tight and dark that nothing was clear. I felt the kind of fear that builds slowly, crawling up my spine. I didn't want to move forward or backward. I just stood there breathing too fast. But I knew staying still would be worse, so I forced myself to keep walking. My legs felt stiff at first, but I pushed through it. The trail became even harder to follow, like it was trying to disappear. Branches scratched my arms and clothes. The ground felt less steady. I kept hearing noises too, little movements that always came from behind or to the side. This time I didn't stop to check. I was too afraid I would see something I didn't want to see. At some point, I realized I didn't know how long I had been walking. I checked my phone and saw the signal was completely gone. The battery was still okay, but that didn't matter when the map couldn't load. I zoomed in and out, hoping the GPS would catch something, but nothing changed. That was when the fear became heavier. I didn't know if I should turn back because everything behind me looked different now. I couldn't tell which direction I had come from. The forest looked the same every way I turned. I kept moving because standing still made me panic more. My legs were tired and my mouth felt dry, but I didn't stop. I could feel something in the air, like I wasn't alone. Not because of ghosts or anything supernatural, but because the forest didn't feel empty. It felt watched. I kept hearing small movements far behind me, never close, but never gone. It was like something was following me but keeping just enough distance. Maybe it was an animal. Maybe it was a person. I didn't know, and that made it worse. Hours passed. I don't know how many. The light began to fade, and the cold started to sting my skin. I knew I had to find a way out before it got dark. I pushed through bushes that weren't part of any trail. I scraped my hands climbing over fallen trees. I slipped on wet ground more than once. I felt tired in a way that went beyond the body, like something heavy pressed on my mind. But I didn't stop. Fear kept me moving. Finally, after what felt like forever, I saw a faint open area ahead. The trees spread out more, and the ground looked clearer. I moved faster, almost running even though I was exhausted. When I reached the open space, I saw a small old dirt road cutting through the woods. It looked rough, but it was a road, and that was all I needed. I followed it without thinking twice. My legs shook with every step. The noises behind me stopped the moment I reached the road, and that scared me in a different way. It felt too perfect, too sudden. I walked that road until I saw the first sign of houses far in the distance. The closer I got, the safer I felt. When I finally stepped out of the woods and onto proper ground, I felt something inside me release. My body was shaking, but I kept walking until I reached a safe place where people were around. The fear slowly faded once I knew I was out. I never went back to that part of the forest again, and I don't plan to. The trail might have been random on the map, but what I felt in those woods was real. It wasn't ghosts or monsters. It was something much more unsettling. The feeling of being followed by something or someone that didn't want to be seen, the kind of danger that hides in real places without making a sound. And I learned that day that the biggest fear doesn't come from things we imagine, but from the things that could actually be out there, waiting in the quiet, just far enough behind us where we can't see them, but close enough for us to feel. The morning air was crisp when I set off on the trail, the kind of cold that bites your skin and wakes you up fully. The forest around me was thick, dense with tall pines and oaks, their branches forming a canopy that filtered the sunlight into soft, scattered beams. I had planned this hike for weeks, a solo trip into the mountains to clear my head and push myself a bit farther than usual. The trail started easy enough, a dirt path winding gently uphill with the occasional crunch of dry leaves beneath my boots. At first, I kept a steady pace, the rhythm of my steps mixing with the sounds of birdsong and the rustling of small animals in the underbrush. The smell of pine and earth was strong, grounding me, and the quiet around me felt safe. As I climbed higher, the trees thinned out and the trail narrowed, bordered by rocky outcrops and patches of wildflowers. The sun was warmer now, casting longer shadows as it climbed in the sky. I stopped briefly at a small clearing to drink water and check my gear. Everything felt right. My phone signal was gone about an hour ago, but I wasn't worried. I had my map, compass, and a good sense of direction. The path soon led me into a more rugged part of the forest. The ground was uneven, covered with loose stones and roots that twisted and turned like veins under the soil. The air grew cooler and the wind picked up, whispering through the branches in a low, constant hum. I noticed something strange then. No birds, no insects, no animals of any kind. It was as if the forest had suddenly fallen silent. The stillness was thick, almost suffocating. I slowed my steps, eyes scanning the trees and shadows around me. About 2 hours into the stretch, I came across a narrow ridge that overlooked a steep drop into a deep valley. The view was breathtaking. The green expanse of the forest stretched for miles, broken only by the blue curve of a distant river. But as I looked out, a sudden sound caught my attention, a faint rustling from the trees below. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then I noticed it wasn't random. The movement was steady, like someone or something was walking through the undergrowth. My heart rate quickened, but I told myself it was probably a hiker like me, maybe a little lost. I decided to keep moving, picking up my pace as the trail veered away from the ridge and into a dense thicket of bushes and smaller trees. The light dimmed as the canopy grew thicker, and the ground beneath me became slippery with wet leaves and moss. My boots made soft squishing sounds with each step. The air smelled different here, damp and earthy with a hint of decay. I felt eyes on me, though I couldn't see anything. A shiver ran down my spine. The trail started to get confusing. There were no clear markers, and the path forked more than once. I pulled out my map and compass again, trying to get my bearings, but the forest around me seemed to shift and close in. At one point, I tripped on a hidden route and stumbled down a small embankment, landing hard on my side. My ankle twisted sharply, and pain shot up my leg. I took a moment to catch my breath, then tried to stand. The pain was bad, but I could still walk if I was careful. This was when things started to feel wrong in a way I couldn't shake. The silence grew heavier, the shadows darker. The rustling from earlier was gone, replaced by an eerie quiet that pressed in on me from all sides. I kept moving, trying to find the main trail, but it was like the forest had swallowed the path whole. Every few minutes, I'd stop and listen. Nothing but my own breathing and the occasional creak of branches. My ankle throbbed, each step sending sharp jolts of pain, but I had to keep going. Suddenly, I heard it, footsteps. Not just the faint sounds of animals, but deliberate, heavy footsteps behind me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I didn't dare turn around. The steps kept pace with mine, slow and steady. I tried to pick up speed, limping as fast as I could, but the footsteps matched me. Panic was rising, cold and sharp. I told myself it was just another hiker, maybe someone on the same trail, but the forest was too remote for casual visitors. I reached for my phone, hoping for a signal, but the screen stayed blank. No service. I stuffed it back into my pack and kept moving, the footsteps still there. After what felt like an eternity, the trail finally opened onto a wider path. A logging road, rough but clear. I could see tire tracks and piles of cut wood stacked neatly to the side. Relief flooded through me. I hurried along the road, my ankle screaming, my lungs burning. Then, about half a mile down, I spotted a figure standing near an old pickup truck. The person was tall, wearing a dark jacket and a cap pulled low over their face. They didn't move as I approached, just watched. I stayed on the road, not stopping, not slowing down. The footsteps behind me had stopped too, vanished with the trees. The logging road led to a small ranger station, unmanned but with a working phone inside. I called for help, explaining my situation. An hour later, a ranger arrived and drove me back to the nearest town. Later, I learned that this part of the forest had seen a rise in illegal logging and poaching. The footsteps I heard were probably from people involved in those activities, watching the trails, wary of outsiders. The figure by the truck was likely one of them, keeping an eye on the road. Looking back, I realized how lucky I was to get out safe. My ankle was badly sprained, but the worst part was the fear, knowing that in the middle of nowhere the danger wasn't from nature, but from people. The forest wasn't haunted, it wasn't mysterious in a supernatural way. It was just wild, and sometimes wild means unpredictable, dangerous. That hike changed how I see the outdoors. It taught me to respect the silence and watch the shadows, but also to remember that the real threats often come in human form. I still love hiking, but I never go alone anymore, and I always make sure someone knows exactly where I'm headed. The forest is beautiful, yes, but it's not always safe, and that's a lesson I won't forget. I set out early one morning, eager to get as far into the woods as I could before the heat of the day set in. The trail was well marked at first, winding through tall pine trees with sunlight streaming through the branches. The air was fresh, and the quiet only broken by birds and the occasional rustle of leaves beneath my boots. I had done plenty of hikes before, but this one felt different from the start. The forest was dense and wild, and the silence was heavy, not like the comfortable calm I was used to. Still, I pressed on, my pack strapped tight and my water bottle full. For hours, I moved deeper into the forest. The path narrowed and twisted, and the trees grew closer together, blocking out most of the light. The air felt cooler here, and damp with the smell of moss and wet earth. I could hear the distant sound of a creek, so I headed toward it, thinking I'd stop for a break and refill my bottle. When I reached the water, it was clear and cold, rushing fast over smooth rocks. I knelt and took a long drink, letting the cold water refresh me. The sunlight barely reached here, filtered through thick branches overhead. After my break, I decided to keep going, aiming to reach a clearing I had spotted on the map several miles ahead. The trail became less obvious. At first, there were broken branches and flattened grass marking where others had passed, but soon even those signs disappeared. I had to watch carefully for markers I had painted on trees with a small knife, but I realized I'd missed one or two earlier. The woods seemed to close in around me, and I could feel a growing sense of unease. I tried to tell myself it was just the isolation, the unfamiliar surroundings playing tricks on me. But still, something didn't feel right. The forest floor was uneven, tangled with roots and fallen branches. My boots caught on more than once, and I twisted my ankle slightly, but I kept moving. I checked my phone's GPS, but the signal was weak, bouncing between satellites. It showed I was close to the clearing, but the terrain ahead looked rough. I climbed over a steep ridge and was rewarded with a view. A wide, open meadow bathed in sunlight. Tall grass swayed in the breeze, and wildflowers dotted the field. It was beautiful and peaceful, a sharp contrast to the dark forest behind me. I sat down on a rock near the edge of the meadow, pulling out some food. I felt tired but happy to have made it this far. I took my time eating, watching insects buzz and birds dart across the sky. The peace was a relief, but it didn't last. While I was eating, I noticed movement in the trees at the far edge of the meadow. At first, I thought it was just wildlife, a deer or a group of birds, but the movement was slow, deliberate. Something was watching me. I froze, scanning the tree line. No shapes appeared, but the feeling of being watched stayed with me. I finished my snack quickly and packed up, deciding to head back the way I came before nightfall. The sun was already starting to dip lower. As I moved toward the ridge, I realized my path back was not as clear as before. The brush was thicker, the undergrowth dense. It was getting harder to see the markers I had left. I slowed down, trying to follow the marks on the trees, but after a few minutes, I realized I was going in circles. The forest looked the same in every direction. Endless trunks, tangled branches, shadowy patches of green. I stopped and pulled out my phone again. The GPS was barely working, the signal dropping to 0. I was lost. Panic started to rise in my chest. I took deep breaths, trying to stay calm. I reminded myself that I had enough water and some food left. I looked around for a high point to get a better view, but the trees were too tall and close together. There was no way to see the sun clearly through the canopy, so I couldn't tell direction. The light was fading fast. I decided to backtrack, carefully checking each marker I had carved. But the forest seemed to have swallowed some of them, and others I had missed. The ground was uneven, and my ankle was throbbing from earlier. Every step felt heavier, the quiet now oppressive. I kept hearing twigs snap behind me, but when I turned, nothing was there. My heart pounded, but I told myself it was just animals, maybe squirrels or birds. Hours passed, and the sun disappeared completely. The forest darkened into shades of black and gray. I pulled out my flashlight and switched it on. The beam cut a narrow path through the trees, revealing thick roots and bushes. I moved slowly, exhausted and tense. The sounds of the forest changed, becoming sharper and louder. The calls of nocturnal animals, the rustling of leaves in the night wind. At one point, I stumbled over a root and almost fell. I sat down on a fallen log, trying to catch my breath. I looked at my phone one last time. No signal, no way to call for help. The battery was low, maybe an hour left. I knew I couldn't just wait there until morning. I had to keep moving. I decided to pick a direction and follow it, hoping to find the main trail or a road. I chose a bearing based on the last faint hint of light from the setting sun and started walking. After what felt like an eternity, I saw something ahead, a narrow dirt path, almost hidden by leaves and branches. Relief hit me hard. I followed the path, which soon opened into a wider trail, clearly used more often. The air smelled different here, less damp and more open. I kept moving, my steps getting lighter with hope. After about 30 minutes, I heard a distant sound, a vehicle engine. My heart soared. I broke into a run, pushing through bushes and down the trail. Finally, I reached a gravel road. I followed it until I saw headlights from a truck coming toward me. I waved my arms, and the driver stopped. I was saved. The driver gave me water and a phone to call for help. The whole way back, I kept thinking about how easy it had been to get lost in the forest, how quickly the daylight and calm could vanish, replaced by confusion and fear. That night, safe in my bed, I realized something important. The woods are beautiful but dangerous. You can prepare all you want, but nature doesn't care about your plans. It follows its own rules, and sometimes those rules mean you have to fight for your life without any help. No ghosts, no monsters, just the wild, real, and unforgiving world. And in that silence, you are truly alone. I did not plan to hike alone that week, but everything in my life had started to feel heavy and loud, and the mountains were the only place where things made sense. I picked a long trail that started deep in a valley and wound through miles of forest before climbing toward a narrow ridge. It was the kind of trail people used only in the colder months because the air got dry and the nights dropped fast. But that day I felt something inside me pushing to go. I packed light, only what I needed, and drove out early enough that the sky still had that pale color before sunrise. I remember stepping out of the car and feeling how the cold bit my fingers. Not in a painful way, but sharp enough to remind me that I would be far from anyone for hours. The first part of the hike felt peaceful. The trees on both sides leaned toward the trail, and the ground was soft with old leaves and dirt. I liked how the forest muted every small sound. Even the birds sounded distant. The trail had no one on it, not even at the entrance, which was strange because I always expected at least one other person to appear. I kept walking, breathing slow, and letting the weight of my pack settle on my shoulders. My boots sank a little into the ground each step, and I felt the rhythm calm me. After about an hour, the land changed. The trees grew thinner, and the path grew more narrow and uneven. There were long stretches where fallen branches forced me to step off the trail, and each time I felt as if the forest was closing a bit more behind me, like the way snow closes a footprint. The air started to smell damp, even though there had been no rain for days. I noticed it every time I inhaled, that earthy moisture that did not match the dry season at all. The silence also grew deeper. Even the wind dropped away, and the only sound left was the steady crunch of gravel under my feet. As I moved farther in, I started seeing strange signs of someone else being there before me. A piece of torn fabric stuck to a branch. A small crushed plastic bottle half buried in the dirt. Footprints that did not match the shape of mine. They looked like they were made by someone who dragged their feet instead of stepping normally, as if tired or in a hurry. At first, I told myself that maybe some hiker had come through recently, but the trail was so empty and forgotten that it felt unlikely. The prints also zigzagged in a way that made no sense, going off the trail, then returning, then veering again. I kept walking, but I felt the hairs rise along my arms, even under my jacket. The deeper I walked, the stranger I felt. The forest seemed to grow darker, even though the day should have been bright by then. The sun was somewhere above, but the trees blocked it more than before. I kept checking the time on my watch, and somehow the hours felt stretched. I would walk what felt like a long distance, then check and see that barely 10 minutes had passed. The silence grew so thick that even my own breathing sounded too loud, like it was bouncing back at me from the trees. Around midday, I reached a section where the trail sloped upward. It was the steepest part before the ridge. The dirt was loose, and every time I stepped, dust slid down behind me. That was when I saw the first thing that made genuine fear crawl into my stomach. On the ground, right in the center of the path, lay a small metal camping cup. It was dented and covered in dirt, but what scared me was that it still had moisture inside, like someone had used it recently. The dirt stuck to the rim felt almost fresh. I did not touch it. I only stared at it, and then at the trail ahead, trying to understand how someone could be so close without me hearing a single sound. I pushed on, feeling my heartbeat grow faster. Every small crack of a twig made me freeze. I kept scanning the trees, expecting to see someone step out, but nothing moved. I reached the top of the slope and found the forest even more dense. The branches looked dead but refused to fall, hanging heavy over the narrow path. The dimness made it hard to see far ahead. The footprints returned again, deeper now, like the person had been running. They led farther up the trail, and something inside me told me that following them was a bad idea, but there was no other way out unless I turned around entirely, and turning around felt like inviting something to follow me. I kept hiking, one step after another, while every instinct in my body told me something was wrong. The footprints soon became messy, like the person had stumbled or fallen. More torn fabric appeared on bark. A broken strap from a bag lay half hidden in mud. I felt the air turning colder, not the natural cold from weather, but a sudden drop that made my hands numb even through the gloves. I stopped and listened, holding my breath. That was when I heard the first real sound that did not belong to me. It was faint and far behind me, like quick, uneven steps on loose dirt. They stopped the moment I moved my head. I forced myself to keep going. I controlled my breathing and tried not to think about what might be behind me. The trail finally led to a narrow clearing, a small flat space surrounded by clustered trees. In the middle of it, the footprints ended. They simply stopped, like the person had stood there for a long time. The dirt was disturbed, too. Something heavy had moved around in circles. The ground looked pressed down by weight and restless motion. No signs of where the person went next. No prints leaving the area. Just the messy, confusing pattern of someone pacing, stumbling, maybe even crawling. I felt sweat run cold down my back even though the air was freezing. The forest felt like it was holding its breath. I turned slowly, scanning every tree trunk, every shadow, every patch of dirt. There was no sign of anyone, but the feeling of being watched wrapped around me so tight I could barely swallow. I decided then I had to leave the trail completely and cut down the side of the ridge. It would be harder, but at least it would get me away from whatever had happened there. I pushed through the trees, breaking branches and sliding down wet leaves. Every few seconds, I thought I heard something following me, matching my movements with a small delay. Not running, not rushing, just following. I never saw anything, but the pressure of it kept me moving faster. My legs shook from the uneven ground, and more than once I nearly fell, catching myself on roots and rocks. My pack felt heavier than it ever had, pulling me backward as I slid. I reached a rocky drop that led toward the lower part of the forest. It was steep, but I knew I could climb down if I went slowly. Behind me, I heard something shift, a single heavy step crushing leaves. I did not look. I climbed down, scraping my hands on the rocks, letting dirt coat my palms. Halfway down, small stones rolled past me, bouncing fast. Something had knocked them loose from above. I didn't stop. I kept going until my boots hit flatter ground and I could run. I ran without stopping, crashing through brush and under branches, until the trees finally began to thin and the light returned. When I reached the lower trail that looped toward the parking area, my legs nearly collapsed from relief. The air tasted clean again. The silence loosened. I did not slow down until I reached my car. Only then did I dare turn around and look back at the trail. Nothing moved. Nothing followed. The forest looked still and harmless, like it had been the whole time. I drove away fast and did not look in the mirrors more than I had to. That night, I lay in bed and tried to make sense of what happened, but the only thing I knew for sure was that someone had been out there. Someone had been ahead of me, leaving those signs, struggling on that trail. And someone or something human, something real, had been behind me too. The next week, I checked every news site and local report to see if anyone had gone missing near that area. Nothing appeared. No missing hiker, no rescue operation, no abandoned gear found. It was like I had walked through the remains of something that no one wanted to talk about. Even now, when I think about that day, the part that scares me most is not the footprints or the sudden cold or the sounds behind me. It's the clearing, the way the footprints simply ended. The thought that maybe the person did not leave because they never got the chance to leave. And the heavy steps that followed me after I entered that space. I never went back to that trail again. I still hike, but never alone and never anywhere near that ridge. Some people say the forest is peaceful, but I know now that silence can hide things. Real things. Things that breathe the same air and move on the same dirt. And sometimes, when I am on a new trail and the trees go quiet, I feel that same pressure on the back of my neck. like something patient and steady is waiting just far enough behind me that I cannot see it. I keep walking every time. I keep breathing slow, but I never forget what happened on that ridge, and I never ignore the feeling that I left something behind. Or maybe something followed me out, keeping its distance, waiting for another quiet place where the sound of footsteps cannot be explained. The morning air was crisp and sharp as I laced up my boots, the faint smell of pine and damp earth filling my lungs. I had planned this hike for weeks. A remote trail deep in the mountains, away from any sign of civilization. Just me, the woods, and miles of untouched nature. I packed light but thorough. A sturdy backpack with water, food, a first aid kit, map, compass, and a flashlight with extra batteries. I had checked the weather the night before. Clear skies, no rain expected. Perfect conditions for what I thought would be a refreshing, if challenging, day hike. The trailhead was quiet, a narrow dirt path winding into the thick forest. As I stepped onto the trail, the soft crunch of my boots on the gravel mixed with the distant call of birds. The woods were alive, but calm. Sunlight filtered through the tall trees, casting long, soft shadows. The path was narrow but well-marked, winding around moss-covered rocks and over roots that twisted like veins in the earth. I kept my pace steady, listening to the quiet sounds around me. The rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze, the occasional snap of a twig beneath a small animal's paws. Hours passed. The trail climbed steadily, and my legs began to burn with the effort. Sweat dripped down my forehead as the temperature slowly rose with the sun. Still, the forest remained dense and cool, a green canopy overhead providing shade. Every few minutes, I stopped to sip water, carefully monitoring my supplies. I had planned to turn around after 6 hours, but something kept pulling me forward. A strange sense of curiosity mixed with a growing unease I couldn't quite place. Around mid-afternoon, the trail began to change. The dense forest thinned out, and I found myself walking along a ridge with steep drops on either side. The wind grew stronger here, carrying a colder edge. The view was stunning. Jagged mountain peaks piercing the blue sky, valleys blanketed in green stretching out as far as I could see. But despite the beauty, a sense of isolation settled over me. There were no other hikers in sight, no sounds of people or distant traffic, just the raw, wild mountain air. I checked my map and compass, making sure I was still on the right path. The trail was supposed to loop back to the starting point, but it felt longer than I remembered. I paused and looked around carefully. The markers on the trees were faint, almost worn away by time. A slight chill ran down my spine. The trail here was narrow and uneven, with loose gravel that shifted underfoot. I felt exposed, as if the mountains were watching me. As the sun began to dip lower, the light shifted quickly. Shadows grew longer and darker, and the temperature dropped sharply. I reached for my jacket and pulled it tight around me. I knew I needed to start heading back, but I was still miles from the trailhead. The forest grew silent except for the crunch of my boots on dry leaves. My heart beat faster, not just from the climb but from an unfamiliar tension that tightened in my chest. The trail split ahead. According to my map, one path led back down to the parking area, the other deeper into the woods. The markers here were confusing. Some trees had faded red paint, others none at all. I hesitated. The light was fading fast. I took a deep breath and chose the path that looked more worn, the one that seemed to go down. Minutes turned into what felt like hours. The trees closed in again, tall and thick. The underbrush grew denser. I stumbled over roots and rocks, my flashlight useless in the failing daylight. The path became a narrow animal trail. I slowed, trying to listen for any familiar sounds, but there was only silence. My sense of direction faltered. I stopped and pulled out my map, trying to orient myself by the few landmarks I could still see. Suddenly, I heard it, a faint rustling in the bushes nearby. My breath caught. I froze, scanning the shadows. The rustling came again, closer this time. My heart pounded loudly, almost drowning out the sound of the wind through the trees. I told myself it was just a deer or a small animal. but instinct told me to be careful. I moved slowly, flashlight beams sweeping the area. The rustling stopped. Then I heard something else, a low, heavy breathing. It was close, very close. I stopped walking, holding my breath, trying to catch any hint of movement. The forest felt alive with unseen eyes. I considered calling out, but I knew better. The wrong noise might bring unwanted attention. I decided to keep moving faster now, but careful not to trip. My legs ached. My pack felt heavier, but adrenaline pushed me forward. The trail twisted and turned, and the undergrowth scratched at my clothes and skin. I thought I heard footsteps behind me, quick and light. I didn't dare look back. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them comforting. I reached a small clearing where the trees opened up to reveal a rocky slope. From here, I could see the last light of the sun fading behind the peaks. I paused, chest heaving, sweat mixing with dirt on my skin. The air smelled colder here, sharper. I checked my map again. The trail should be just on the other side of this ridge. If I could get there, I might find the main path and be able to follow it back. Carefully, I climbed the rocks, using my hands for balance. The rocks were slippery with moss, and one step felt like it could send me tumbling down the slope. At the top, I spotted the faint outline of the main trail, a worn dirt path cutting through the trees. Relief flooded me. As I moved toward the trail, I heard the footsteps again, now unmistakable and steady. They were behind me, following. Panic surged. I didn't run, but my pace quickened to a fast walk, then a jog. The forest seemed to close in, the darkness thick and suffocating. I kept glancing over my shoulder, seeing only shadows. I finally reached the main trail and headed downhill, following the markers carefully. The light of my flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the way. After what felt like forever, I saw the faint glow of the parking lot lights through the trees. My legs almost gave out, but I pushed harder. I burst out of the forest edge just as the night fully swallowed the trail behind me. The sounds of cars and distant voices drifted in from the parking area, a stark contrast to the silence of the woods. I collapsed onto a bench, gasping for breath, my body shaking with exhaustion and relief. Later, as I sat in my car with the heater blasting warmth into my chilled bones, I replayed everything in my mind. I realized what had scared me wasn't some ghost or wild animal, but the raw, unforgiving wilderness itself. The way it isolates you, how easily it can turn confusing and dangerous when you stray from the path. My sense of direction failed me, and the forest became a trap, feeding on every instinct to survive. I learned that day how important it is to be prepared, not just with gear, but with respect for the land and its hidden threats. The mountains don't care about your plans or your courage. They only care that you pay attention, stay aware, and know when to turn back. That hike left me shaken but wiser, and I have never forgotten the quiet weight of those dark woods or the way the fading light made the world seem suddenly much larger and far more dangerous than I had ever imagined.